Story 1.
Husband uncovers wife's cheating, exposes affair, uses DNA evidence, divorces, and disappears. "Chris, why are you home?" inquired Angela, my spouse for 28 years, as she entered through the garage and saw me at our kitchen table less than 10 feet away. Her body partially blocked a tall, younger man following her into our home. Angela, consistently beautiful, stands at a striking 5 feet 9 inches, weighing a healthy 145 lb, with auburn hair falling over her shoulders. She always dresses professionally for work, and today, in a white blouse, an extra button undone revealed enticing cleavage between her spectacular 38D cup chest. A black linen skirt highlighted her world-class legs, and 3-inch heels perfectly shaped the cheeks of her backside. Briefly contemplating Angela's seemingly foolish question, I responded by stating that I live there. A quick flash of irritation, which had been increasingly prevalent over the past weeks, surfaced as she inquired about the reason for my presence at home at 3:30 in the afternoon. I often jest with anyone who will listen that I've loved Angela since we first met. Meeting her as the administrative assistant for 4 top executives in her company, she escorted me to the senior suite for hours of meetings. Taking a chance, I asked her to dinner as she walked me back to the lobby, and the rest is history. By now, Angie's companion had maneuvered around her and stood at her side. Anticipating a smirk, I was surprised to see concern in his intelligent eyes. Clearly, things weren't going as planned. I couldn't help but question Angie about the reason for her early arrival home, an hour and a half earlier than expected. Angela and I have been inseparable since our first date. I dedicated all my energy to her and our family, establishing a successful insurance brokerage firm with the assistance of her employer. Angela achieved a bachelor's degree in 6 years, progressing from a support role to leading HR in the company's Hartford, Connecticut office. Having loved Angela unconditionally for nearly 3 decades, I faced the transformation she had undergone with determined calmness. Desiring to break her as effectively as she broke me, I gave Angie my signature crooked grin, prompting her response. "We came home early to talk with you." I questioned Angie about the collective reference to "we," locking eyes with her, taking advantage of the moment to introduce himself. Her companion confidently stated that he was Michael Browner, the new attorney at Kellerman & Sons, closely collaborating with Angela for the past couple of months. Despite his extended hand, which I ignored, and while maintaining eye contact with Angie, I refrained from reacting violently, opting to growl and assert that I knew exactly who and what he was. For the first time, I noticed signs of concern in my wife, and she cringed when I mentioned Angie. "You once threatened severe consequences for anyone who called you Angie. Why? Tolerate such disrespect in your own home from this individual I'm referring to as Mofo?" I pointed in his direction. Angie, habitually worried and confused, is a meticulous planner. I was certain she and Mofo had meticulously planned for every possible scenario for this conversation, with every I dotted and every T crossed. In her perception, I was already a compliant, betrayed man. A quick glance at Mofo brought a smile to my face. I was fairly certain his sphincter muscle was tightening, soon to be clenched as tightly as mine. A tumultuous situation was brewing, unlike anything Angie and her companion could envision. Taking 2 or 3 deep, cleansing breaths, I endeavored to push aside the growing rage and disgust into a quiet corner of my heart. Internally, I resolved to proceed, thinking it was time to disrupt their plans. Once more, I suggested the idea of making 3 drinks and proposed discussing matters in the living room. Angie requested a subdued glass of wine. When turning to the other person, he appeared wary. Responding to my offer, he mentioned Angela's information about my liking for bourbon and craft beer. Nodding, I confirmed as I rose from the kitchen table and headed to the family room's bar. Exiting the room, I heard immediate, urgent whispering as they moved through the kitchen to the living room. A few minutes later, I joined them. They sat together on the sofa. Handing Angie her favorite Merlot and Mofo a tulip glass of amber ale, I settled into an armchair across from them. After raising my glass in salute, I took a sip of the fiery liquid. Returning the toast, Mofo sipped his beer, studying the color and carbonation. He made a remark about the complexity of the amber ale, asking about its identity. I responded that it was Pabst Blue Ribbon. At the mention of the beer, Mofo's eyes flared with anger, and Angie, appearing confused, mentioned my previous claim that Pabst Blue Ribbon was worse than donkey urine and considered the worst beer ever made. She was midway through her comment when she saw me laughing. She expressed her frustration, stating that I was being rude and condescending during what was supposed to be a calm conversation. I responded with a smile, questioning her accusation and suggesting that we needed to kickstart our conversation properly. I anticipated learning about having a polite, uplifting, and loving discussion from my wife. Angie cringed and avoided eye contact as Mofo, now identified as Michael, took over, beginning to discuss matters. I interrupted, directing my attention to him and pointing out his initial use of Mr. Harrington before presumptuously switching to calling me Chris. I insisted on being addressed as Mr. Harrington. As his face began to redden, I concluded with a shrug and suggested the alternative of addressing me as Sir. Instead of allowing Michael to continue, I turned to Angie and asked with heat, inquiring about the topic she wanted to discuss. When Michael seemed prepared to respond, I interjected, informing him that I was addressing my wife and instructing him to sit there, drink his complex amber ale, and remain quiet. Angie, in a state of fury, expressed her discontent with my behavior that afternoon, insisting that it needed to stop. I nodded, giving the appearance of contemplating her request, and posed a question about whether my behavior was better or worse than hers over the last 5 or 6 weeks. Angie, partially confused and worried, asked for clarification. Mofo seemed to hold his breath, perhaps thinking their carefully crafted plan had derailed. Locking eyes with Angie, I revealed that I was disturbed, expressing my uncertainty about what upset me more, her involvement with someone else or her treating me like an imbecile. Angela's expression showed her astonishment. Her eyes narrowed, and she, in a hushed voice, mentioned having more friends at my office than I did. She received an anonymous email 2 weeks ago warning about my alleged affair. The email included 3 attachments depicting me on a picnic lunch at Middlewoods Park, engaging in hand-holding and kissing. Apologizing for the way she found out, Angela was in the process of figuring out how to continue when I interjected, asking if she wanted a divorce. She responded negatively, moving to the edge of the couch, leaning forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and passionately expressing her love for me. Angela clarified that her involvement with Michael was a short-term fling, explaining that he was new to Connecticut and hadn't made many friends. She anticipated him finding a regular girlfriend once he was settled. Apologetic, she acknowledged that the situation didn't work for her, as she had signed up for a monogamous relationship with a loving wife. She concluded by stating that she was sorry, but a divorce would better align with her future plans. Angela pleaded with me to stop, expressing her disinterest in a divorce and suggesting that I probably felt the same. She characterized her involvement with Michael as a one-time fling, emphasizing that it was nothing more, and that it stemmed from her attraction to him and a desire for extra excitement in her life. She assured me that it had never happened before and would soon be over, promising that it would never occur again. After taking a small sip of my bourbon, I remained silent for a few moments before responding. I pointed out that her promises held no meaning and asserted that everyone in the room knew she was a liar. Anticipating Angela's reaction, I continued, questioning why I should believe this was her first affair and suggesting that it could be her 51st. I urged her to think about our shared efforts in building a family and mentioned that with Kelly married and contemplating starting her own family, we could now slow down and plan for a wonderful retirement. I expressed the belief that in a few years my fling with Michael would be long over and forgotten. I rose from my seat and, without inquiring if anyone desired another drink, walked to the den and replenished my glass. I was certain my lack of courtesy did not go unnoticed by the 2 individuals in the living room. Upon my return, I observed them huddled together and engaged in a whispered conversation. Mofo sought permission to speak, asking if he could express a few things. In response, I allowed him the floor with a disgusted reply. After gathering his thoughts, he conveyed that Angela was correct in characterizing their relationship as a short-term fling. He expressed regret for getting involved with a married woman, emphasizing that it was something he had never done before. Acknowledging the connection they shared, he spoke about Angela's exceptional qualities while understanding my mention of divorce in the heat of the moment. He cautioned against it in the long term, noting the decades we had invested together and advising against throwing it away. Additionally, he mentioned Angie's initial concerns about the prenuptial agreement, suggesting its vulnerability due to its age and changes in the legal landscape. He dismissed its enforceability, claiming proof of infidelity was lacking. I pondered how my wife had become so misguided as he concluded his legal summation. Turning to Angela, I expressed my inability to understand her choice of seeking legal advice from a corporate attorney who graduated in the bottom quarter of his class from Texas Southern University Law School, consistently ranked among the top 10 worst law schools in the country. I questioned how she knew that. Mofo didn't finish explaining that knowing one's enemy was one of my mottos. Redirecting my attention to Angela, I inquired about her plan moving forward. After taking a few moments to think, she disclosed that she and Michael were spending the weekend together. She detailed their itinerary, mentioning her presence at his apartment that night and a trip to New York City the next day. They planned to stay there Friday and Saturday night, with her returning home on Sunday. Despite being aware of their exact plans, the audacity of my wife's statement deeply saddened me. I expressed my disappointment, hoping she could perceive the profound sadness in my eyes. I pointed out the impact on our quarterly getaway weekend tradition to New York City, filled with memories of spectacular sights and heartwarming experiences such as award-winning Broadway plays, concerts, and sporting events. I conveyed my feelings about the tarnishing of those memories and expressed concern about the change in Angela, comparing her to the person she was involved with. Angela sensed my devastation and responded accordingly, but I was too consumed by the voices in my head urging me to end it. Turning to a very concerned Michael, I questioned him about his wife's reaction to his involvement with mine. Angela urged me to stop, explaining that Michael was a widower and his wife had passed away several years ago. Even Michael displayed some decency, cringing at my wife's last statement. I smirked and addressed Angela, remarking on the contrast between Michael and her. Without pause, I inquired about her being widowed, and Michael hesitantly confirmed it. I reached down and retrieved a manila folder from the backpack next to my chair. After opening it and scanning the first page, I revealed details about Michael's late wife, Dr. Cynthia Browner. She was an emergency department surgeon at Ascension St. John's Hospital in Detroit, with a husband, Michael, and 2 daughters, Katie and Lacey. The document mentioned her resignation and relocation to the Hartford, Connecticut area to join her husband immediately after her children finished school. Despite my dissatisfaction with my marriage, I couldn't help but find the look on Angela's face amusing. Angela confronted me about the revelation, asking if I had lied to her. In response, I couldn't contain my laughter, expressing amusement at the situation of a cheat and a liar accusing each other of dishonesty. Michael intervened by reaching out and cupping Angela's hand. Just before I could protest, anger boiling inside me, I realized something unsettling. I just didn't have the energy to care anymore. Angela's companion, Michael, began apologizing, confessing to his deceit and professing his desire for her. It was sickening to hear. He stood there, holding her hand, making plans for their future together as if I didn't even exist. Angela, after a brief moment of contemplation, took his hand and turned to face me, promising to cut ties with Michael and return to being the loving wife she claimed to be. As they exchanged words, my heart sank further. It was like watching my world crumble before my eyes. Finally, I gathered the strength to speak up. I requested their attention, asking for the chance to lay out my thoughts and feelings, to be heard amidst their betrayal. They exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of how to respond to my request for fairness. I pushed the issue, emphasizing the importance of giving me just 30 minutes of their time. After some reluctance, they finally acquiesced and took their seats. With practiced ease, I set up several Zoom meetings, a skill I had honed during the COVID-19 pandemic. As the TV screen flickered to life, I addressed Peter and Lou, asking if they could hear me. Once the introductions were made, I stunned Angela and her companion by revealing the presence of Lou Beard, my new divorce attorney, and Michael Browner, a corporate attorney. Handing the floor over to the attorneys, Lou wasted no time in laying out the situation. He informed Angela, now addressed as Mrs. Harrington, that he was representing me in our impending divorce and that papers had already been filed. He gave her a deadline to secure her own legal representation and arranged to have her served, warning of the consequences of non-compliance. Lou disclosed that infidelity was cited as the cause for divorce, supported by detailed evidence collected by a private investigator documenting her affair with Mr. Browner. Their shock was palpable as the reality of the situation sank in. As Lou concluded his remarks, I placed a second manila folder onto the coffee table in front of Angie, causing both of them to react with surprise at the loud sound. I informed them that it contained a copy of our divorce petition, along with the private investigator's report. As Michael reached for the folder, Angie briefly glanced back at the screen. I then stated our intention to insist on the full enforcement of the prenuptial agreement, emphasizing its regular review every 2 years to align with state legal guidelines, with Angie's signed and notarized signature on every update for the past 28 years. I expressed confidence in its enforceability. Next, I conveyed the decision made by the board of directors of Harrington Brokerage the previous night, which relieved Angie of all corporate responsibilities and severed her association with my firm entirely. I outlined the timeline for returning her company car, canceling company credit cards and her cell phone, and terminating memberships to various clubs. Additionally, I mentioned the cancellation of joint credit cards and the freezing of joint financial accounts, all in accordance with the prenuptial agreement. We then detailed our request for an 80-20 split of assets in my favor, including the retention of the house, free and clear by myself, along with the request for expedited eviction and a 30-day period for Angie to remove her personal belongings from the property. I mentioned the absence of alimony and child support, and noted that there were additional claims which Angie's attorney could explain. Lou concluded by asking if there was anything he had missed, to which I responded that he had covered all the essential points, expressing appreciation for his thoroughness. As the TV screen went black, Angie immediately stood up and exclaimed that they should wait. She turned to me and requested to bring them back, as she had questions. I responded by informing her that it doesn't work that way, and she would need to hire her own lawyer to get answers. Angie then expressed her frustration, threatening to destroy me. With a smirk, I turned to her companion and inquired about his legal opinion on the potential impact of this development in the divorce. His lack of response caused Angie to sink back into the couch, visibly distressed. I couldn't help but smile widely as I waved the TV remote at her before pointing it at the TV again. As the second Zoom meeting commenced, I addressed Jake and confirmed if he could hear me. He responded, stating that he had a conference call to attend and needed to keep it brief. He proceeded to inform Browner of his termination, stating that his personal items were being removed from his office and would be left in the lobby with a 24-hour window for retrieval before disposal. Jake mentioned that there would be no recommendation provided for Angela. I could sense Angela's fear as her boss's voice slowed down. Inside, observing her shaking, I realized she was terrified. Despite expressing disappointment in Angela's behavior as a senior member of his staff, Jake acknowledged her 29 years of exemplary service. However, he announced that her position in Hartford had been eliminated and offered her a similar role at their facility in Albany, New York. He gave her a week to decide on the transfer and 30 days to complete the relocation. The screen went blank again, leaving Angie in tears while her companion slouched back on the couch. I was purposely smirking at Mofo. When he saw me, his rage started to build. He was younger, bigger, and I'll guess stronger. Unfortunately for him, he was as stupid as a bag of rocks. As Mofo was ready to explode, I once again waved the remote, pointed it toward the TV, and pressed a button. The screen lit up and I asked, "Dr. Browner, can you hear me?" Mofo and Angie sat in stunned silence. They were white as ghosts, and their mouths were hanging open. The face of a beautiful blonde filled the screen. Cynthia addressed Michael, informing him that she had filed for divorce and that he should expect to be served in the coming days. She stated her intention to remain in Michigan with their children and mentioned that she had managed to retain her position at the hospital. Michael pleaded with Cynthia, asking her to reconsider and suggesting that they could work things out, insisting that his affair was just a fling. The expression on Cynthia's face, as seen on the screen, indicated her disgust. Cynthia dropped a bombshell, revealing Michael's repeated job losses due to his infidelity. Her additional investigation following Chris's prompt painted a damning picture. She listed off the names of Angie's associates, detailing Michael's affairs with each of them. Angie remained silent as Cynthia laughed off any expectation of an answer, declaring Michael unwelcome in her home and requesting his address for his belongings. As the screen faded to black, Michael's threat sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Without hesitation, I retrieved my Colt .45, aiming it squarely at him. The sight of the weapon seemed to physically stagger Michael, but I didn't flinch. I laid down the law, giving him a choice: leave or stay quiet. His silence was the only acceptable response, and thankfully he chose to comply. Turning back to the screen, I caught sight of Angie's tear-streaked face, her anguish evident. It was a gut-wrenching sight that stirred a mix of empathy and resolve within me. Angie disclosed that she had been seeing a counselor for the past 2 weeks, which prompted her to groan and cry. She expressed frustration, remarking on the irony that despite her actions, she was the one seeking mental health support. I responded with a laugh, acknowledging the absurdity of the situation. Later, I recounted to Angela an insightful question posed by Dr. Waters during our counseling session. She asked whether I understood the saying, "Love is blind," which struck a chord with me. I reflected on how my love for Angie had blinded me to her flaws, even to the point of ignoring her infidelity. Despite everything, I conveyed the depth of my love for her, expressing doubt that she would find anyone else who loved her as intensely as I did. Angie, still visibly upset, explained that she intended to continue seeing Dr. Waters, emphasizing the importance of having someone trustworthy to confide in, especially after such a traumatic experience. She expressed disbelief at the extent of the humiliation and disrespect she endured from someone she loved deeply. However, she remained optimistic, stating her determination to overcome the hurt and move on from the relationship. Angie mentioned discussing her plans for the day with Dr. Waters, who had reservations about seeking revenge, but approved of the first 3 Zoom meetings as a form of payback. However, Dr. Waters advised against the next Zoom meeting, fearing it might set back Angie's personal recovery due to the emotional pain it could cause. I've considered it, and will acknowledge that Dr. Waters is probably correct. The upcoming Zoom meeting is likely to do more damage than good, but I don't care. This meeting will hurt me, but it will devastate you. As I held up the remote for the fourth time and waved it at Angie, she shrunk back into the couch in a panic. I pointed it at the TV and pushed the button. All eyes were riveted to the screen, and when the face appeared, Angie expressed distress, murmuring in anguish. Chris's daughter Kelly then expressed her love for her father, prompting him to reciprocate. Angie cried out, questioning how Chris could treat her so poorly. Kelly interjected, revealing that she had overheard Angie's conversation with her boyfriend and was aware of their actions and plans. She expressed her disappointment and disgust towards her mother, calling her actions grotesque and pitiful. Angie attempted to justify herself, but Kelly remained firm, asserting that Angie's behavior was selfish and self-absorbed. Angela expressed her deep loneliness to Kelly, explaining how much she missed her since she moved away. Kelly, appearing perplexed on the screen, questioned if Angela was blaming her for her own troubles. Angela denied this accusation, insisting it wasn't what she meant. Despite Angela's plea to come to Boston to talk, Kelly rejected the idea, citing Angela's plans to be with her new boyfriend and their private celebration nearer to Cape Cod. Kelly revealed her pregnancy and her intention to celebrate with those who bring love and happiness, not the negativity that has consumed Angela's life. Angela, asserting her maternal authority, demanded an invitation, but Kelly firmly refused, seeking a celebration devoid of the turmoil Angela represents. For the fourth time, the screen went blank. While Angela sat visibly upset, I stood up and discreetly placed my pistol at the back of my pants. I announced that I was going out for dinner and would return in 2 hours. Addressing Angela, I requested her to pack her belongings and essentials, informing her that she wouldn't be allowed back until the court responded to my divorce petition, a process expected to take about a week. Turning to Mofo, I reminded him of my capabilities and gave him 3 days to leave the state, warning of severe consequences if he remained by Monday. As I pulled open the front door, I glanced back at the defeated individuals and mentioned the supposed beauty of the upcoming weekend in New York. Second story. My name is Jim Reynolds, and I'm now 56 years old, standing at 5 feet 8 inches, maintaining decent shape. I've been married to Kelly for 22 years, whom I believe to be my life and soul partner. Kelly, 45, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and standing at 5 feet 2 inches, is built for lovemaking. I cherished lovemaking moments with her whenever we were alone, although there were times she didn't reciprocate the favor. I spent 8 years in Special Forces right after high school, mastering explosives, followed by 6 years engineering school. Subsequently, I established my own company, now a multi-million-dollar construction business. Not many know about my military service due to the demons I battled, leading to 4 years of counseling. My pilot's license predates my military service, but Kelly never trusted me enough to join me for rides. I fell in love with Kelly from the first moment, and we married 2 years later. Coming from old money with her maiden name as Moore, she descended from Richard Moore of the Mayflower. Kelly's family, however, viewed me as a mere servant. Despite this, I spared no expense on her, buying a large house in Cambridge, Massachusetts, complete with a 4-car garage and a BMW. We have 2 kids, or more accurately, she has 2 kids. John, 21, and Rick, 19, are both in college. I bought them each brand new BMWs, and I own a 10-year-old GMC 4-wheel drive pickup. About 6 years ago, they began mistreating me, later revealing they don't consider me family. They don't heed my words and do as they please, only listening to Kelly, their mother. I hired John 8 years ago, thinking he was my best friend, but the kids seemed to adore him. Approximately a year ago, Kelly inadvertently left her email open, and my curiosity led me to read through them all. To my disbelief, she professed to have despised me since we met, a sentiment echoed by her entire family. Shockingly, I discovered the kids aren't mine, they belong to my ex-best friend John, a truth they've known for about 6 years. Unbeknownst to me, John knew Kelly before I hired him, and the situation amuses them. My sons, Rick and John, my ex-best friend, find humor in my obliviousness. Upon marrying Kelly, my father-in-law insisted on a prenup, which I signed. It expires in 2.5 years after 25 years of marriage and includes an infidelity clause stipulating that cheaters leave with nothing. A friend from my military days, Kevin, connected me with Paul, an expert in surveillance. Paul set up a system where Kelly's emails are forwarded to a private account of mine along with copies of my kids' emails. My entire house is wired to allow me to hear their phone calls, and I have video recordings. Without Kevin's intervention, my family might have faced dire consequences. He dissuaded me from resorting to violence and suggested ways to hurt my family emotionally, such as taking their money, tarnishing their family name, and exposing their disgrace publicly. John and his friends mock me, well aware of the prenup and the affair, eagerly anticipating the arrival of Tom, my best friend, to take over. I possess a video of my father-in-law discussing a plan to create the illusion that I received funding for my company from him. Their scheme involves having John take control of my business, a plan they've been plotting for years. This explains their strategic move to have John apply for a position at my company and act as if he were my closest ally. The only individuals I genuinely trust are my old military buddies, and I'm grateful for maintaining contact with them. I've enlisted Paul as a computer consultant for my company, and he has secured its network, helping me identify allies and foes. This provided me with about a year and a half to prepare for an impending divorce. During this time, I assumed a role that required me to endure a strained relationship, refraining from expressions of love and engaging in physical closeness only to maintain appearances. Reflecting on how she mistreated me, I intensified these encounters to inflict emotional distress. I made sure to do so only when I was certain she hadn't been involved with John, often sending him out of town for business without her catching on. Although I acknowledged past indiscretions, I pretended ignorance to keep up the appearance that John remained my closest friend. To humiliate her, I engaged in public encounters and discreetly conducted DNA tests that revealed our children weren't biologically mine, but rather John's. Their elaborate plan involved John taking over the company after our divorce, aiming to exploit and embarrass me. Privately, I met with a competitor to sell my company at a reduced price as I trusted his honesty despite our prior competition. I disclosed my reasons for the sale, ensuring confidentiality among a select few, including our lawyers. The law firm I hired shared my disdain for my father-in-law, a key factor in my decision to engage their services. They provided guidance on establishing a private bank account and phone account. Additionally, they suggested convincing Kelly and the kids to lease cars instead of buying new ones, a proposal well received by everyone involved, ensuring annual upgrades at a lower cost for me. Quietly, I began packing my belongings and placing them in a rented storage shed. People would often laugh either in front of me or behind my back. I suggested to Kelly that we start filing our taxes separately and transfer the house solely into her name for tax purposes. To achieve this, we needed a new mortgage solely in her name, a concept her entire family supported, making it simpler for her to claim the house in the divorce. My new law firm also recommended this to protect my credit. Despite her desire for home improvements, including an in-ground pool, I allowed her to have what she wanted, funded by a second mortgage in her name. Since the house was now solely in her name, the loans also had to be in her name. Half of the funds went towards the changes she wanted, while the other half discreetly found its way into my private account, unnoticed. I continued handling all the bills, altering my insurance beneficiaries to direct funds to charities in the event of my demise. I sold my company without attracting attention, ensuring the new owners retained all employees except for John and his associates. Within a year, everything was prepared for my departure. I proposed treating the entire family, including in-laws and my now ex-best friend John, to a 2-week trip to Europe, a move they likely mocked behind my back, yet it served my purpose, especially since Kelly footed the bill. I purchased 150 acres of land in Alaska, discreetly accessible only by plane, utilizing my concealed pilot's license. Plans were made for an off-grid cabin on stilts and a plane shelter, with a hired company to build it, aiming for a move in ready status. Recognizing the longer timeline for completion, I also bought a house with a large barn-like garage. My residence would be in Fairbanks, a simple house where I could keep a motorhome and have a place to stay when I wanted to travel. A military friend who shared my dislike for my in-laws registered a new motorhome in his name. Despite his reluctance, I insisted on compensating him and my other friends for their assistance. From Kelly's emails, they believed I was naive. I ceased payments on the house, their cars, insurance, and utilities, all in Kelly's name. Thus, her credit would suffer, not mine. Establishing a P.O. box in Kelly's name, I had all bills sent there, creating an illusion that I was managing their finances. When the divorce is finalized, her credit will be impacted, and with no alimony payments due to unemployment, they won't uncover the details of my company's sale. All the funds went to an offshore account, creating the appearance that I lost the company to the new owners. Moreover, my plan involves disappearing just before the trip. I informed them of a company emergency, stating that I would join them later. Their lack of concern and happiness about my absence didn't go unnoticed. On the night prior to their departure, I made sure Kelly would remember me vividly. Engaging intimately, I pushed boundaries for the first and final time, leaving her initially pleased but ultimately sore and angry. Too bad for John, who had been intimately involved with her for years but had denied me the same experiences. Once they departed for Europe, I returned to the house, leaving it wide open. My friend Paul retrieved the surveillance equipment, and I paid a moving van company in cash to transport my belongings to Alaska. I took essentials such as clothes, tools, and fishing gear, along with weapons from my military days, securely stored until my arrival. Leaving all furniture behind, I ensured they wouldn't discover my destination, leaving no paperwork mentioning Alaska. My son Mike, uninterested in hunting or fishing with me, remained unaware of my usual trip destinations. I retained my old phone account to keep Kelly oblivious to my plan, intending to close it out in about a month. Upon departure, I left my old phone with a colleague, instructing him not to answer calls from my wife but allowing him to make calls for a month. Subsequently, I visited my in-laws' house with my keys, turning on all the lights. Utilizing Mike's laptop, I posted on a college website about a week-long college kegger party at their house, anticipating potential chaos. Recognizing their frugality and preference for John, I closed all bank accounts and canceled credit cards from both my wife's and my accounts, totaling $50,000. I sold my truck to a car dealer and, after 3 days, departed for Alaska without disclosing my destination. Monitoring events through my wife's emails, no one, including my wife, kids, in-laws, or ex-best friend, made any effort to inquire about my whereabouts. They enjoyed thinking everything was my responsibility, unaware that my wife Kelly was the one funding it all. I took my time enjoying the sights while crossing the country, relying solely on cash for expenses. I drove to Bellingham, Washington, hopped on a ferry to Valdez, Alaska, and then continued to Fairbanks, all without needing a passport. By the time I reached Washington, Kelly and her family had returned from Europe, finding their homes and properties wrecked, completely unaware that I orchestrated it. Surprisingly, they hadn't noticed my absence, being more concerned about their houses than my departure. It was the police, not my so-called family, who started inquiring about me on that Sunday, a day after their return to the United States. Granting my attorney written power of attorney for my divorce, I informed them that I would check in 2 weeks later, without revealing my whereabouts. On Monday morning, Kelly received her infidelity divorce papers. Although I wanted to sue John for alienation of affection, Massachusetts law prohibited it due to numerous lawsuits against state politicians. Nevertheless, John and his associates lost their jobs, as per my agreement with the new company owners. With all his belongings gone, it was a shame Kelly found herself owing more than she had in the bank, pursued by creditors, and her cars repossessed. Power and water were cut off, property taxes and both mortgages were overdue, forcing her and her spoiled kids to move into her parents' hotel since their home was completely trashed. Her parents had to rent cars for the entire family. Feeling empathy for their difficulties, John also had to move in with them, pleading with Kelly's parents for a rental car. They transitioned from BMWs to less impressive vehicles. Kelly and her family hired private investigators to locate me, while Kelly's attorneys attempted to stall the divorce, a futile move. The case gained public attention with DNA test results and explicit videos circulating online. Audio recordings exposed the affair's duration, family involvement, and their plans to ruin and humiliate me publicly, seize my company, and their disdain for the middle class. Videos and audio of her family bribing politicians and public officials and mistreating honest individuals were disseminated on various websites. The divorce eventually concluded. The judge assigned to the case had to recuse himself as he was one of the exposed paid-off public officials. Though I reached out to the kids, they ignored me. 5 years later, during a visit to Boston to finalize some old business, I went to a restaurant frequented by her family. They walked past me without recognition, now sporting long gray hair, a beard, and in better shape. I asked my waiter to send their table a bottle of champagne. The entire family looked 20 years older. They stared at me, and after a few minutes, Kelly yelled, "Oh my God, you son of a BH!" She recognized me and revealed my identity to them. John attempted to confront me, but with one punch, I knocked him out. When his son approached, I subdued him, but not completely. Kelly ran up, berating me for ruining her family and hurling insults. The police arrived and arrested me. I had the waiter contact my lawyer since I doubted the police would allow me to. They reviewed the surveillance tapes, confirming my calm interaction and subsequently releasing me. The footage depicted me sending champagne and calmly conversing with them, highlighting my self-defense stance. Without my lawyer's foresight in preparing for such incidents and securing copies of the surveillance tapes, I believe the police wouldn't have released me, given their connection to my father-in-law. Kelly phoned my hotel room, requesting a conversation. We met in the hotel lobby, ensuring our discussion was recorded. She questioned why I had taken such actions against her and her family. I looked at her in disbelief, calmly revealing that I discovered their plot against me and acted preemptively. I disclosed my awareness of her ongoing affair with John, questioning why she married me if she harbored hatred. I refrained from mentioning the wired house or spying through her email. They lost their house and cars. Mike lost his house and truck, forced to live with her parents. Kelly dismissed it as nothing personal. Initially escaping her family, she admitted finding pleasure in manipulating me and enjoying the situation involving John. I asked why she didn't divorce me when she met John, and she claimed it was initially enjoyable, ensuring she'd gain everything. I left it at that, returning to my room without further comment. The next day I departed, heading back to Alaska to relish a peaceful life. I left them to grapple with the ruins I caused in their lives: credit, finance, pride, and reputation. Far preferable to resorting to violence, they will have to live with the constant reminder of me.
Story 2.
My wife cheated on me for 8 years, and my mom supported her. I've now abandoned and cut them off. I don't know where to start. It's so terrible knowing that my wife doesn't want to live with me anymore. The worst part is she's not giving any reason for that. She doesn't want to move in with me, and my mother is supporting her in this. Let me give a background to this. I'm 51, male. I had to move out from my hometown 13 years ago for work purposes, leaving my wife, Mona, 48, female, and 2 children in Texas. Children are now 23 and 21. They both have moved to Houston and are living on their own. 14 years back, when the U.S. suffered a great recession due to the housing bubble. Our business was one of those that went bankrupt overnight. My dad had passed away and I was running his construction business. Then everything went for a toss. I had the responsibility of my mother, 2 school-going kids, and my wife. It was just too much for me to manage in an unstable economy. After depleting all the savings and everything else, I had to make a tough decision of moving out. After trying my luck in various Asian countries, I finally was able to set up my business in Dubai. It was a tough phase, but the drive to provide a good lifestyle to my family pushed me through all the difficulties. After leaving Texas, I wasn't home for more than a year until I was able to set foot on my new venture. After that, I used to visit home every 5 to 6 months or so. I wanted to bring my family here, but Mona and the children didn't want their school curriculum to be interrupted. Last year, my youngest daughter completed college and cracked a job at her sister's company. Before she was leaving home, I planned my vacation home to spend some time with her. During that visit, I asked Mona to shift with me here now that both the children have moved out, but she denied it, saying that my mom would be left alone. I suggested that Mom could also join us, but they both didn't like the idea of leaving their hometown. They didn't want to shift to a new country with such a different culture. They were right in their way. Middle Eastern culture is very different from ours, so I didn't insist further. During my last visit home, I told Mona that I was planning to wrap up things in Dubai and move back to Texas. I thought this to be exciting news for her, but it was not. Her reaction to this was far from happy. I asked her if she didn't want us to be living together. She said no. I'm happy, just that you worked so hard to establish yourself there, so why do you want to leave everything and come back? She was right to the extent that shutting down things that took so much sacrifice to build was not easy and might not be a good decision. But the thing is, I have been living away for 13 years, and now that my major responsibility, children's education, was over, I wanted to move back to my hometown, my comfort space. I assured her that I would take care of our finances the way I have been doing. I was planning to set up something in Texas now that the country's economy has bounced back. She was still not convinced. That was a red flag for me, but I gave her the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, my mom visited. Out of the blue, she said I shouldn't be making this hasty decision of moving back. I hadn't told her or anyone else about my plan, so it was Mona who would have told her. I was shocked. Like, Mona pushing back on this could be considered a red flag, but when my mom also expressed a similar concern, I actually went into self-doubt. I thought maybe I was making the wrong decision, so I dropped that idea. However, this was bothering me, that my wife didn't want to live with me. The reason could be making sense, but I was heartbroken with the way Mona had become so emotionally distant from me. This feeling fogged into my head so much that after returning from home, I limited my calls and texts with her. I thought she would notice it and ask me about it, but she didn't care to ask if everything was fine. There were days when I didn't call her, and she also didn't contact me. Days grew into weeks, and now her communication is only transactional. All these indicated one thing, that she no longer needed me. So last month, I confronted her. I asked her if she didn't love me anymore. She brushed it off, saying I was just overthinking. She said she's just busy taking care of the house and my mom, who has grown fragile with age. I didn't know what to reply. I mean, it's not usual that you find your wife bonding so well with their mother-in-law and taking care of them. I was grateful to Mona for being so kind to my mom. My uneasiness is growing with each passing day. I cannot wrap my head around the question of why my wife would not want to be with me. We already have our own house, our major responsibilities are over, and on top of that, I'm assuring her that our lifestyle won't be compromised. So why she doesn't want me home is not making sense. Yes, as you all are thinking, the same thing popped into my head too. Maybe she had got someone better. But the thing is, how do I find out the truth? She has shown no other red flags until now. She had been a great mother, raising the children so bravely in my absence. It's not easy. She has fulfilled all her roles so elegantly. Sometimes I feel bad for suspecting her. But you know how long distance works. Any advice on how to find this out? Your situation is like trying to understand why people still use fax machines. It's outdated, complicated, and no one really knows what's going on. I mean, 13 years is a long time to be away from home. Sounds like she's actually gotten used to life without you. It's become her new normal, and honestly, it wouldn't be unheard of for someone to seek intimacy outside of a relationship when their husband isn't even home more than half the time. All that's to say that if she was cheating, you being away doesn't at all give her an excuse to cheat on you. Update 1. Thanks for all the advice. I was glad to connect with you folks who shared their story of betrayal. Quite a lesson to learn. Mona had been cheating on me, and my mother knew about it all this while, but she didn't tell me anything. I don't know what I did to deserve this fate. Posting my story here and connecting with you people, one thing was sure, I could not let this slide. I planned a surprise trip home. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my mom. As I was entering my house, I dreaded bumping into Mona with her affair partner. Kind of funny, but after reading so many stories of cheating wives of deployed husbands, this is the one that came to my mind. Gladly, nothing of that sort happened. Mona was in the kitchen when I entered the house using the spare key. Yes, she was shocked to see me. I carried a bouquet with me to cover it up as a surprise. She was obviously surprised but also suspicious of my sudden appearance. She bombarded me with questions regarding my show-up. I told her that I had light work that month, so I decided to come home. She forced a smile and pretended to be happy, but it looked evidently fake. I spent the next few weeks digging out the truth. I did everything a psychopath in my situation would have done. Not too proud of some of it, but yeah, I clearly had no choice. I sneaked into her phone, eavesdropped on her conversation, planted a GPS on her car, and followed her around the town. All this rendered information in bits and pieces, giving me a clear picture of what was happening in my absence back home. It came out that she had been seeing someone for the last 8 years. The day I arrived home, she was super guarded about her phone. Earlier, she used to clean all the evidence before I arrived. This time, she didn't get the opportunity. I tried snooping into her phone on the very first day but didn't get a chance, and when I was finally able to access it, I found nothing. She might have cleaned it up at the very first chance. Her cheating came to light when I placed a GPS device inside her car and followed her along. Initially, I didn't suspect anything when I found her entering a hardware store, but as I was waiting outside for her to return, I saw that the owner had turned down the shutter and closed his shop. I felt so dizzy seeing that. After a couple of hours, I saw her leaving the shop, and the owner opened the shutter after her car left the driveway. I wanted to go inside the shop to see the affair partner myself, but I stopped myself, thinking that maybe the affair partner would recognize me and ruin my plan. I waited for her to visit next so that I could catch them in the act. She had a pattern of stepping outside in the afternoon. On some days, she would visit my mom, sometimes with her friends or parents. I mindlessly followed her everywhere, waiting for her to meet the affair partner. Finally, yesterday, she went to meet my mom. Usually on those days, I used to back off and didn't follow her further, and that's why it took me so long to catch her. But yesterday, I kept waiting there and found them leaving the house together. I didn't find it suspicious at all. I thought they were heading for shopping or something else. I didn't want to follow them, but something in me did that anyway. They stopped their car at the hardware store, and my heart sank. The affair partner came out and greeted them both. My mom and Mona both got out of the car. The affair partner kissed Mona right in front of my mom. They spoke for a few minutes, then the affair partner hugged Mom, and she sat inside the car and drove off. The affair partner and Mona went inside his shop and he pulled down the shutter. I just couldn't believe my eyes. The betrayal from your wife was one thing, but betrayal from your own mother is something beyond imagination. The truth suffocated me to the extent that I had to walk down the pathway for a few minutes to regain my breath. After a while, I went to the shop and knocked. It went unanswered. I knocked vigorously until the affair partner opened the door. I asked him, "Where's Mona?" and he froze. I pushed him aside and barged inside the shop before he could react. The lights were off and I could hear a feeble voice from the storeroom. I raced inside to find my wife lying bare, back touching herself and moaning for the affair partner. It was just for a fraction of a second before the affair partner pounced on me and dragged me outside the storeroom, while Mona shrieked at the top of her voice. The moment was so chaotic that it took me a while to understand the situation. I punched the affair partner and freed myself. By then, Mona came out of the storehouse covering herself. I grabbed her neck and asked her, "How long?" The affair partner tried to come to her rescue, but Mona stopped him. She started crying and pleading that we discuss this at home. I realized I might get into trouble for this scuffle, so I backed off, came outside, and drove off. I went to my mom's house. I barged inside the house shouting, "You knew it! You knew it! You also betrayed me!" Mona had already called her because Mom didn't act surprised by my behavior. She just cried and held my hand, asking me to calm down. I broke down. Mona also arrived by then. Seeing her face made me angrier. I asked them to tell me the truth. After a lot of nudging, Mona said, "It was very lonely when you left. It's not easy to live alone for 13 years. You were so busy with your work that you hardly had any time for me. Your calls were limited to a few minutes, and it was more of a status check call regarding the children and Mom. What about me?" I asked her how long this had been going on. She said, 7, 8 years maybe. Holy cow! I was such an idiot, working my butt off for those years in an alien country so that my family could have a good life, and this was what they were doing. I asked her, "Why didn't you divorce me if there was so much disconnect between us?" She broke down again and said, "I love you. I never wanted to separate from you. Spending time with the affair partner was only to distress myself and kill my loneliness and nothing else. He doesn't mean anything in my life." Really? After fooling around with him, he doesn't mean anything to her? Wow. I looked at Mom and asked her how I had wronged her to deserve this betrayal from her. She sobbed and said, "I know you hate me, but think of my perspective. You left me alone here. Mona was taking care of me. She also has needs as a woman. I understand that, so I had to support her." Support her betraying me? When I got all my answers, I got up to leave. They both tried to stop me and followed me outside, but I warned them not to. I told Mona not to come home and that I want to be alone for a while. I drove back home sulking. I feel sick in my stomach. I don't know how I should react to this. Is this affair really my fault? That I was wandering in a foreign country for my family's sake? This is so gutting. You've literally been away trying to provide for your family, and not only your wife but your own mother has replaced you and betrayed you. If Mona was feeling so lonely, there should have been conversations where living situations were revisited and feelings were made known. 7, 8 years is a long time. That's not just cheating. She's completely built a new life with this guy. It's not your fault, but a marriage definitely takes two. You thought you were doing what was right, and you were trying to take care of your family financially. And as your mother, she should have supported you. She's wrong to have ever supported Mona. She should have spoken to you to let you know where things were with Mona the moment she thought Mona wasn't doing well without you. Back home. Update 2. You guys have been a great support. Thanks. This is what happened next. I spent the next few days in my sorrows. Then I drove to Houston to meet my daughters. They were not kids. They deserved to know what their mom was up to when I was busy providing for them. I did this also to safeguard myself. My plan was to leave the country, and Mona could use that against me to manipulate my daughters. They were shattered to know the truth, but the elder one also said that sometimes she felt Mona and my mom were definitely up to something. She also said that she suspected my mom to be seeing a widower who lived 2 blocks away. Anyways, that's not my problem. My dad had passed away decades ago, so she could do whatever she wanted. But she was supporting Mona in all this, and that is a problem for me. The next day, I packed up my stuff and came back. Mona and Mom had been calling me since then. I think they came home to find an empty house, and that's when reality hit them. Yeah, I abandoned them. For the initial 1 month, the calls and texts were filled with sorries and pleadings and asking me to return home. But eventually, they got concerned about the money. I had not blocked them deliberately. I wanted to see them getting anxious without money. I froze my bank accounts and credit cards. They lost their marbles with that. It was obvious because neither of them had any source of income. Mom was on a state pension, but it wasn't enough to cover the lifestyle they had been leading. They are desperately trying all means to get a response, but I have ghosted them. Mom has resorted to emotional blackmail, saying that Dad would have been so heartbroken to see that I have left her alone in this old age. All their pleas are falling on deaf ears. They had betrayed me so badly. I never suspected Mona of anything. I never checked her phone like people in long-distance relationships do, but I always respected her privacy. More than Mona, I felt betrayed by Mom. Sometimes when I had a dizzy feeling about Mona, seeing her strong bond with Mom made me feel lighter. In return, I get cheated upon. The reason they used to cover up Mona's cheating was so lame, like she was lonely, hence she decided to open her legs. She was feeling alone in her own house with children, surrounded by friends and family? Wow. If you compare it that way, I was lonelier, literally alone in a foreign land with no family or friends. I could have also brought someone inside my bed, but the difference is, I didn't. I was so busy thinking about the well-being of my family that fooling around was the last thing that came to my mind. I was working hard, saving up, so that I could move back home as soon as possible. When none of their advances got a response from me, they reached out to my daughters for help. Mona didn't know that I told the truth to the girls, and she did exactly what I had expected. Mona badmouthed me in front of them, saying that I had financially cut them off. She also alleged that I was having an affair in the Gulf, or maybe had married someone there. After listening to all her BS, my girls gave it back to her, and told her that they know the truth about her affair. They chased her away that day, but Mona has been reaching out to the younger one, asking for help. The younger one is closer to Mona, and she's leveraging her innocence to extract money from her. Anyways, I'm not going to ask her to stop helping her mom. She's an adult and knows what to do. Mom also has been reaching out to my daughter for financial help. As for me, I'm still unable to move on from the feeling of betrayal. I have also not thought about divorce yet. It's going to dent my pocket unnecessarily. Divorce would be beneficial for Mona financially, and also personally if she wants to marry the affair partner. But I'm not getting into that. She's already living in my house, and that's the maximum she can get from me. I'm out of the country and have no accountability, so whether divorced or not, it really doesn't matter to me. I'm trying to move on with my life. We'll update if anything develops. Take your time, OP. This is a huge blow. You're right to freeze the accounts. This whole time, you're working your butt off to support them, and they do this to you. They don't deserve another cent out of you. And you have a great point. You were just as lonely in Dubai. You were far more alone than she ever was. At least she had friends and family around. Cheating could have been just as easy for you. Update 3. Here's what happened next. After I financially cut them off, they tried all the resources they could. My older daughter refused to help them, but the younger one got manipulated into helping them. But she didn't earn much. She's in her first job with very little pay, which covers her basics. Despite that, she's saving some of it to help her mom. I felt proud of her, actually. Eventually, she got exhausted helping Mona. She suggested Mona get a job to sustain herself, but Mona took her for granted, saying that it was her responsibility to take care of her mother in her time of need. My younger daughter did whatever she could from her little income, but when it became too much for her, she cut her off. Mona couldn't marry the affair partner as she is still married to me, so she has been reaching out to me for a divorce. She has been threatening me with all sorts of legal consequences, but you know what? I don't care. I'm out of the country. I don't think she has enough knowledge or resources to sue me in a cross-border setup, and even if she does, there's no punishment for abandoning your cheating wife as per the law of this land. So yeah, good luck with her legal notice. Current status of Mona is that she is working at the affair partner's shop, and I don't know what she's getting in exchange for her service, money, or something else. The affair partner doesn't have a proper house. He lives in his camper, and he also has an ailing father to take care of. So, he's also financially not strong enough to provide for Princess Mona. As far as my mom is concerned, now I sometimes feel bad for scorching her and want to help her out, but she gets a pension. And that should be sufficient for her to survive. She brought that on herself. I might make it up with her in the future, but not right now. Though she has said sorry for what she has done, it didn't feel like she was genuinely sorry for her actions. So, I'll wait for the day when she genuinely repents her mistakes, my anger subsides, and my love for her overpowers my emotions. Some of you advise me to move on and enjoy the vibrant lifestyle of Dubai. Funny though, it is not as hunky-dory as it looks on social media. That royal, mesmerizing lifestyle portrayed on social media is not for all. It needs money, a huge lot of money. So, I'll skip that for now. Laws concerning women are also quite strict here. Also, I'm not interested in using women's bodies to get over my grief. But yes, I have been traveling a lot since then. I have been to China and Bali so far. There's a long list of other Asian countries and cultures that I'm planning to explore subsequently. We'll initiate a different thread to share my travel experience. Thanks for all the love and support. Honestly, your mom really screwed you over. You shouldn't feel bad. She did this to herself just as much as Mona did. And as for your love for her, not sure that will ever be the same. And your love doesn't have to overpower your emotions. Love changes, and you can love the woman you thought you knew, but not sure it will ever be the same. What's important right now is just going with the flow, feel the feels. You have 2 beautiful kids who love and support you. What do you make of this? What would you have done? What do you make of Ops X using the excuse of loneliness?
Story 3.
Carrie and I tied the knot 6 years ago. In these tales, folks often portray their wives as truly remarkable, and I get that, having had ample time to reflect. My wife Carrie was undeniably attractive, unquestionably exceptional, hard to put into words. I was attracted to her for sure. We go way back, all the way to our teenage years. Interestingly, I'm a few years her senior. To me, she was always the young girl from down the street. However, something occurred when she was 14 that seemed to forge a connection between us. Right before heading off to college, I parted ways with my friends after a night at the pub. It wasn't too late, but darkness was settling in as I opted for a shortcut through the local park. It turned out to be a fortunate choice. I stumbled upon young Carrie facing trouble with a couple of boys around her age. Trouble might be an understatement. It was quite serious. If I hadn't arrived at that precise moment, who knows what could have transpired. According to her, I played the hero, swooping in just in time to rescue her. However, the truth was that when I confronted the 2 guys, they got scared and quickly left. In any case, I became something special to her. Throughout the rest of the summer, I observed her not exactly trailing me, but certainly making an effort to be wherever I was. Naturally, my friends teased me since at 18, I was deemed too old for her. Yet, even then, I had to acknowledge she was a remarkably attractive young lady with, even at that age, a pair of incredibly well-shaped long legs. After that, I embarked on a 3-year study period and hardly crossed paths with her until I returned after graduating, spending an extended summer there before heading off to my new job. By that time, she was 18, and I was almost 22, a somewhat different situation altogether. This aligned with the fact that she had blossomed into a beautiful young woman, making her ongoing affection for me quite understandable. We entered into a relationship, becoming a couple, strolling hand in hand in the park and seizing every opportunity for kisses and cuddles. By then, I was no longer a Vestal, but she still was. Despite a few close calls, she maintained her pureness. This isn't to say that I didn't explore the delightful softness of her body, but that was the extent of it. I wasn't overly concerned, as deep down, I still saw myself as her protector. Carrie continued recounting the time I rescued her from a dire situation, and I'm pretty certain that summer strengthened her love for me. Honestly, I wasn't far behind in falling even more deeply for her, though it wasn't a mutual feeling at the time. Despite openly discussing alternative paths, we sadly went our separate ways, Carrie to Leeds Metropolitan University, and me to my inaugural job in Bristol. We were quite geographically distant. While she pledged fidelity, I took it with a grain of salt, having experienced the changes and temptations during my own 3 years as a student. I did visit her a few times, but during the last visit, it became evident she had another life to contend with, and we gradually drifted apart. That could have been the end of it, as I certainly didn't linger. I embraced a few years of revelry on the Bristol scene, exploring different relationships. However, my trajectory shifted, leading me back closer to home, where Carrie re-entered my life. By then, she had graduated and was already working when her parents invited me over. I must admit, the initial welcome from darling Carrie was a bit less warm than anticipated. However, that quickly changed. Indeed, she transformed herself, matured, and gained sophistication and worldly wisdom. Yes, she lost her pureness, but not to me. Nonetheless, it wasn't a significant concern, and who was I to complain? Then, one evening, she confided to someone that I remained her special hero, and it felt like we were picking up where we had left off. I rekindled my connection with her, and this time, we didn't stop there. We soon became involved in bed, and the more we shared our love, the deeper it grew. Marriage followed inevitably, as certain as morning follows night. 6 years later, we were still as deeply in love as ever. Carrie, at times a bit conservative, disapproved of various things, but never pushed her views too strongly, making it a non-issue. We were genuinely happy, and the future looked promising. My problem arose when my company decided to promote me, a situation I had no issue with, except that it meant relocating to the vibrant city of Leeds, where my loving wife had spent her university years. It was a choice between that and the Middle East, and since we wanted to start a family, Leeds seemed the more sensible option. Initially, there were no problems, at least not for the first couple of weeks as we settled into a temporary rented flat. I knew I would miss watching Arsenal play football, and Leeds City wasn't about to replace them in my affections. After all, Billy Brimner and crew had long since retired, but overall, Leeds didn't seem like a bad place to be. For those unfamiliar, it's a lively city with a bustling nightlife. Then one evening she suggested we take a tour of the city and visit some places she used to frequent as a student. We had drinks in a few student pubs, but even Carrie felt somewhat out of place after 8 years since her Leeds Met graduation. We dined at a restaurant where she once worked, but she found no familiar faces, and the decor had changed. It was evident she felt a bit let down by the evening. It lacked the magic she had hoped for. It's strange how a place's transformation since your last visit can be so disappointing. The whole evening seemed destined for a poor ending. Finally, she declared that there was a little pub on the edge of town where she worked during her final year. It wasn't a student pub, so maybe some locals would still be around. It was still early evening as we walked hand in hand through the city center, resembling two lovers. We left the car behind until she led me down a couple of back alleys, and the nature of the buildings began to change from bright city lights to shabby backstreet houses and crumbling workshops. I felt doubtful and asked Carrie if it was like this when she was here. She laughed, assuring me it hadn't changed. She had lived nearby in a cheap flat shared with 3 other girls, one of whom worked at the same pub for some time. She pointed around a corner and mentioned that her joy was evident, making me grin. There, in front of us, was a dingy-looking pub I wouldn't have entered on my own, but with Carrie, it was different. Not that she dressed provocatively, that wasn't her style. Carrie epitomized elegance, from her neatly cut dark hair to her smart suits and formal high heels. That evening was an exception, with her in a slightly daring short skirt. I joked that maybe it was to recall her student days, but on second thought, perhaps she had some inkling of how the evening would unfold. Maybe not, though. No, I think if she had known then, she wouldn't have left our flat. The pub was called the Rose and Crown, with 2 typical big period-etched, multicolored windows to the front that undoubtedly looked splendid in their time. I questioned hesitantly if she was sure this was it. She assured me that it wasn't so bad once you get inside. With that, she gave me a beautiful smile, the one I'd cherished since I knew her as a young girl, and pushed open the pub door. Little did I know then that I would never feel the same again about that smile. I followed her inside, and she was correct. The interior was old-fashioned but quite tidy, featuring a long, dark wooden bar and a charming old mirror behind it. Surprisingly, the windows, which appeared grubby from outside, looked fine from within as the street lamp lights shone through them, casting a warm glow on the bar. Carrie stood there, finely enchanted, recognition evident on her face. She remarked that it hadn't changed a bit. I added that I shouldn't think it had changed much in 50 years, eliciting a giggle from her as she lovingly looked up at me. She pointed and exclaimed about something at the other end of the bar, releasing my hand and sliding across the wooden floor. She greeted the bartender with a, "Hi there, remember me?" The bartender turned around to look at her, appraising the pretty young woman in front of him. A smile broke across his face as he recognized her and exclaimed, "Carrie, is that really you, Carrie?" Carrie nodded in confirmation, grinning up at the tall, lanky bartender, whose name I never did discover. I couldn't help but grin myself, realizing that Carrie had finally found someone who remembered her, and the evening wasn't going to be a total waste after all. He expressed joy and rushed from behind the bar, embracing Carrie tightly and planting a full-on kiss on her lips. The embrace and kiss didn't last long enough for me to feel jealous or anything, but the first uneasy feeling crept coldly through my gut, wiping the grin from my face. They chatted animatedly about things unfamiliar to me, and I waited for an introduction. As they discussed people Carrie had known back then, I still waited in vain to be introduced when another man entered the pub. The bartender called out to him, urging him to see who had turned up. He walked right by me, exclaiming, "Carrie!" as soon as he spotted her again. I had to endure my wife being embraced and kissed by a man I'd never seen before. Once again, I waited in vain to be introduced. The second man informed her that Carl would be there any moment, and to my surprise, she blushed. He noted her reaction, saying he thought that would get to her. Carrie responded, "Really? Carl still comes." The man assured her that Carl would really be there soon. I wondered who Carl was. Carrie had never mentioned a Carl before, which was perfectly reasonable, but I didn't like where the evening was headed, and I didn't appreciate being ignored. I remained standing there on my own, feeling like a bystander. I cleared my throat in an attempt to catch her attention, and when that failed, I coughed loudly. The bartender glanced at me, but Carrie continued to ignore me, engrossed in conversation with the other man. The bartender apologized, saying he would be with me in a minute. Unsure of what to do, I could have grabbed her arm or something, but she was so engrossed in reconnecting with old friends that I chose to bide my time. I walked up to the bar just behind them and leaned on the counter. The bartender finally tore himself away from my wife and asked, "Yes, mate? What can I get you?" I told him I'd like a pint of the best and whatever the lady wanted. The barman's smile vanished as I spoke. He snapped at me, seemingly oblivious to the fact that I was her husband or that she was even with me, saying he didn't think this young lady accepts drinks from just anyone. I retorted, my temper starting to rise, that I believed she would have a drink with me. The barman began to say, "Now look here, buddy, you can't come in here." However, that's as far as he got, as Carrie finally turned around, the raised voices finally catching her attention, and she intervened. She casually informed the other two that it was okay, and he was with her, hardly bothering to glance over at me. The barman fell silent but continued to scowl at me as he poured my beer. He demanded £2.20, pushing the glass across the counter toward me. I asked about the lady's drink, and the bartender brusquely informed me that it was on the house. He promptly asked her what she wanted, and poured it without acknowledging me. I stood there sipping my pint, puzzled about what was happening. My wife was engrossed in conversation with the others, laughing and giggling as they shared old stories and updates since she had left. Carl's name came up multiple times, and a concerning smile appeared on Carrie's face each time. She continued to completely ignore me, and I was becoming quite upset by her strange behavior. I was about to step in between them to regain my wife's attention when the pub door opened, and two big guys walked in, one W. Punche and the other West Indian. The barman exclaimed the moment he saw them, informing them that Carl had turned up out of the blue. So, this was the mysterious Carl, a sizable guy, appearing rather tough. Carl halted when he noticed Carrie, and a huge grin spread across his face. He shouted, "Surprise, Carrie! Where have you appeared from?" Without saying anything more, he rushed past me, and as the others made way, he embraced her. Carrie kissed him back with equal enthusiasm. This time, it lingered a bit too long for my liking, and the way the others stood there beaming at the two of them while locked together didn't help either. Then his left hand dropped down her back, cupping the cheek of her bottom. I'd had enough. I stepped forward to intervene, deciding that if Carrie was going to allow that, and couldn't even involve me with her friends, then it was time to leave. I managed only one step forward, and came to an abrupt stop with a large, strong hand on my shoulder, gripping me hard. A deep voice from behind me, belonging to the guy, said, "Wouldn't if I were you, buddy," as I realized he had anticipated my move and stepped forward to prevent it. I angrily told him to get his hand off me, trying unsuccessfully to shake him off. All four guys turned toward me at that point, all squaring up, anticipating trouble. Carrie told them to leave me be before anything happened, saying I brought her there tonight and that I was fine and I wouldn't cause any problems. She said all this without even looking at me or acknowledging me in any way. Her head turned toward me for a moment, but our eyes never met. The big guy warned me to stay cool, a hint of threat in his voice. He released my shoulder, but guided me away from the group, positioning his large frame between them and me. I couldn't believe what was happening. An icy lump started to form in my gut. Just 20 minutes earlier, I had strolled hand in hand with my beloved wife through the heart of Leeds city center, blissfully in love. Now, I found myself sidelined and excluded as she gravitated toward one of the tables in the increasingly crowded pub. I observed several attractive yet provocatively dressed women approaching Carl or his sidekick, engaging in brief conversations before leaving or taking their places at the bar. I wasn't so naive as to miss what these women were, or more precisely, what they did for a living. My somewhat prim and proper wife was socializing with a pimp. He must have been one. Carl must have been a bloody pimp. Could she be so oblivious not to recognize her surroundings? Regardless, Carrie and I needed to leave. I called out loudly enough for her not to feign ignorance, saying it's time we left. I urged her, "Come on now, Carrie, it's time to go." She glanced over at me, and the smile vanished, replaced by a troubled expression. She didn't say no, nor did she say anything at all. Carrie simply shook her head at me and turned back to her friends, the smile returning. And before long she was giggling like a little schoolgirl, apparently having forgotten that I was even there. The deep voice at my elbow warned me to play it cool or piss off, saying he wouldn't warn me again. I started to protest, but he put his huge hand on my chest and pushed me firmly away from the group set around the table and back up to the bar. He informed me that the lady didn't seem interested in me and suggested I stay there and wait for her if I wanted, or go home. He even suggested finding another date for the night or trying one of their ladies. Without waiting for me to say anything, he beckoned one of the women over, and she responded immediately, standing right beside me. He introduced her as Sally, telling me it would cost, but she would take care of me tonight. He advised me to piss off with her and forget about the little lady over there, as she and Carl had a lot to catch up on. He apologized if my date didn't go as expected tonight, stating that's life. He backed off and went back to the table, leaving me speechless with rage. The courtesan Sally warned me not to push my luck, cautioning that the pair of them should not be messed with. She suggested I let her go and find another girl for the night, mentioning that she is attractive enough. I looked at her with disbelief and hissed that the woman in question is not my girlfriend, but my wife. Sally, realizing her mistake, exclaimed and expressed concern, acknowledging that the situation was bad. Desiring to return to the table, I found Sally blocking my way. She advised me to hold on, stating that I really wouldn't want to do that. Frustrated, I demanded to know what I should do. Sally offered to talk to my wife for me, asking if she was genuinely my wife. The look on my face alone convinced her. Holding up the palm of her hand to ensure I didn't follow her, she slowly threaded her way through to the table where Carrie and the others were sitting. I observed as she bent down and whispered something in Carrie's ear. Carrie looked up in my direction for the first time since she'd entered the pub, her eyes meeting mine. There was almost a look of surprise as she looked over at me, as if she had genuinely just remembered my presence. She looked sheepishly away, and then whispered something back to Sally. Sally conveyed to me that Carrie mentioned she would come over and see me shortly upon returning. I responded by expressing my impatience, stating that I wanted her to be here now, not in a minute. Sally cautioned me, saying, "Don't push your luck, mister," before walking away to approach another customer further down the bar. I stood there enraged, unable to divert my gaze from Carrie, noticing Carl's arm sliding across her shoulders, his fingers casually brushing against one of her chest balloons. She threw a few watery smiles my way, but I found myself counting the minutes, wondering at which point I would explode. After 5 minutes, she stood up and excused herself, not coming straight over to me. Instead, Carrie made her way to the toilets and disappeared through the door. I didn't know if she wanted me to follow or not, unsure of what to do. Before I could decide, she came out again, and glancing over toward Carl's group, approached me. I angrily demanded what she was playing at, insisting that we needed to leave immediately. When I reached for her arm, she pushed me away and backed off, instructing me not to cause a scene. She conveyed that I could go if I wanted, but she intended to stay there for a while. Carrie firmly informed me that she was staying to chat with her old friends. She suggested I could go and come back later for her, or stay there and wait. I looked at her in disbelief, finding it hard to comprehend that the woman who had professed her love for me earlier that day was now telling me to leave. When I failed to respond, she continued, saying, "Better if you just go home, Terry. I'll get a taxi back later. We'll talk about this then." I cried out, expressing that I wasn't leaving her there. She responded resignedly, stating, "Just stay and watch then, Terry, if you must. You might not like what you see, But for your own sake, don't interfere." Despite my attempts to persuade her to leave with me, she resisted, suggesting it would be better if I left now. She assured me, "I'll see you later. Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything will be okay afterwards. I love you and will make it up to you, I promise." She said to just give her this one evening, assuring that everything would be like before, and attempted to move away. I seized her arm, astounded at her outrageous behavior. Before I knew it, I was flung back against the bar as the big guy knocked my arm away from my wife and me. I took a swing at him, but it seemed futile. He shoved me further along the bar and then pushed me to the ground, reminding me that he had warned me. A nasty grin adorned his face. He picked me up as if I were a featherweight and propelled me toward the door. Ted cried out not to hurt me, insisting that I hadn't done any real damage. I don't really know if her pleas had any effect on the outcome, but at least she tried. The next thing I knew, I was outside and doubling up as he punched me in the stomach and then reeling backward as he punched me in the chest. It felt as if I'd been punched by a train, and I fell flat on my back and waited for the smacking to continue. It didn't come. I lay there for a good while wondering how the hell I had gotten there. I had a pain in my chest from where he had punched me and was fighting for my breath due to the blow to my middle. 2 punches, just 2 casual punches, and I had been reduced to a wreck, aching all over and still unable to stand up. Another 10 minutes passed, and I managed to pull myself up to my feet, shaking off the dust and grime from my clothes. How could an evening that had started so wonderfully have descended so far? It was the same thing. I just didn't know what the hell to do. I'm no softy, but how could I stand up to a great Hulk like that? He'd homicide me. I'd never felt so damn humiliated and hopeless in my entire life. Some bloody special hero I was. It wasn't as if I even knew anyone in Leeds. I didn't have a friend to call for help. I stood there and watched the slow stream of clients going in and out of the pub. More than a few guys went in and came out later with one of the women on their arm. The pub was a brothel. My wife of 6 years, who only that morning I had discussed having children with, was in a brothel. She'd taken me there and must have known. I fought back the tears and knew what I had to do. I couldn't walk away and leave her there like that. I didn't know what I was going to do with her, but I couldn't walk off and abandon her. If she didn't come home with me this time, then potentially our wonderful, perfect marriage was over. I guess more than an hour had passed before I managed to get myself ready to go back inside the pub. I didn't know what to expect. I certainly never expected what confronted me. I guess you might describe it as an impromptu striptease act. It was my wife and another girl. My wife had the last shred of clothes on her, and that was about to go off. A large group of guys surrounded the pair of them, grinning and laughing as Carrie's last clothes came off. I couldn't stand it. I charged forward, pushing my way through the other men, and grabbed at Carrie. She looked around at me, a startled look on her face. All she managed to express was her distress, saying, "Oh no, Terry! Oh, for Christ's sake, no!" I fared no better than the last time, and the lights started to go out for me as someone smashed me hard in the face. The last thing I remember seeing was Carl, clutching my wife in his arms. I think she had a look of horror on her face as she watched me being dragged out of the pub. They weren't so easy on me the second time, and it was several hours later that I fully came to in the middle of a car park some distance from the pub. I heard all over, but I guess they were experts, and though I was in pain, nothing seemed to be broken. It took me an hour to find my way back to our car, and another before I managed to start it and drive back to our new rented flat. I fell asleep on the sofa, not knowing and by then beyond caring at what time Carrie would be home. The following morning I woke up feeling worse than end of life. I had a very long, very hot shower, and at last my body started to feel like it belonged to me again. I got slowly dressed, trying not to think of the previous evening, but I just couldn't stop. I didn't know if the pain in my body was as bad as the pain in my brain. Was my marriage over? I had no idea, but it seemed pretty likely. For the life of me, I couldn't understand what had happened. How could my loving wife Carrie have acted like that? I'd known her all those years, but quite obviously not as well as I thought. It was 11 o'clock in the morning, and where the hell was she? I was not going to chase back over. The phone had only been connected the day before, and unless it was a double-glazing salesman on a cold call, then the only person other than myself who had the number was my darling wife. I answered after picking it up. She greeted me quietly, asking if I was okay. I responded, questioning her understanding of the situation. She expressed remorse, stating her regrets for the previous night's events. She mentioned her mistake in returning to the pub and asked about my whereabouts. I demanded to know where she was, but ignored her question about my well-being. She urgently claimed, "No, don't be stupid, Terry. The only one was—" She left the sentence unfinished, realizing what she was about to say. Neither of us said anything for several minutes, though I could hear her sobbing on the other end of the line. She pleaded for understanding, expressing her desire for me to comprehend her actions. She asked to come home and wanted things to return to how they were. She promised to explain everything if given a chance. Desperately, I wanted to tell her to leave, but this had to be sorted out one way or the other. I stated that she should make her own way home or get one of her boyfriends to drive her back. "Oh, thank you, Terry," she whimpered. "I'll be back in half an hour at the most. It will all be okay, you'll see. Everything will be okay." I slammed the phone down before she had time to say anything else. Damn it, bugger it. I loved her, but I hated her. What the hell was I going to say to her when she got back? Was I going to tell her to pack her bags, or would I take her in my arms? As it turned out, I didn't have to make that decision. Half an hour passed, then the full hour. The afternoon turned into evening, and still no sign of my errant wife. By 8 p.m., it was obvious she wasn't actually going to come home. Not that night anyway. And for me, that meant possibly not any night in the future. As each hour had passed, I had gotten angrier and angrier, not shouting and screaming angry, but with cold, calculating fury that consumed me. I put a few things in the car and drove very carefully back to the city center, hoping that I could find the pub again that Carrie had taken me to the night before. After several mistakes, I eventually recognized a large factory, and just down the road, the Rose and Crown pub. Parking the car just around the corner, I got out and walked towards the bar, outwardly confident, but my heart pounding away inside. I had to admit, I was nervous, even physically frightened after what they'd done to me the previous night. I hesitated by the front door, not knowing what to expect. I didn't even know for sure if Carrie was still in there. I pushed the door open and went in. The atmosphere resembled the previous night, populated by rough-looking characters and even rougher-looking women. I recognized several faces, and a couple of them appeared surprised to see me. If they weren't certain it was me from the night before, the black eye and bruises on my face would have given it away. The barman, upon spotting me, inquired, "Haven't you had enough, mate?" I demanded to know the whereabouts of my wife, expressing my frustration. At least he had the decency to appear surprised. He questioned the idea that Carrie was my wife, screwing his face up in confusion. I nodded to confirm. He reacted with disbelief, exclaiming, "Bloody hell, she told us you were just a date." The barman, recalling the events of the previous night, and perhaps more that occurred after I was thrown out, looked at me with sympathy. He sensed trouble, though he couldn't predict the nature of it. He just knew there was going to be an issue. He sloped his head to one side, indicating the far corner. When I looked over, there she was. Carrie sat on Carl's knee. Neither of them had noticed me enter, and I crossed over to them before they realized I was there. Carrie gasped in surprise and tried unsuccessfully to pull her blouse back over to cover her body. She needn't have bothered, as we'd all seen them before. Carl simply grinned at me. That sort of grin when you know you've got the better of someone. I remarked to Carrie about the seemingly extended half hour, inquiring if something had caused a delay. Initially, she responded with silence, her expression reflecting shock. Carl scornfully retorted, instructing me to leave and claiming he would send her home when he deemed fit. Carrie, finally finding her voice, whispered assurances to me, pleading, "Please, Terry, I'll definitely be back home later, I promise you." Carl laughed, kissed her, and taunted me more than her. He asserted control, declaring, "You'll go when I say you can," while keeping a watchful eye on me to gauge my reaction. I addressed Carrie, disregarding Carl's sneers. I conveyed to her that it was her last chance, emphasizing that the decision needed to be made at that moment. I had contemplated the situation extensively, and believed that even then, if she had chosen to come with me, prioritizing me over him, I would have attempted to work through the issues. Perhaps we could overcome what had happened. At that point, I wasn't entirely sure, but there was a possibility. She looked at me pitifully. Indecision written all over her face. Her eyes, her lovely brown eyes said it all. She knew how much she had hurt me, but instead of doing what she knew she should, she was calculating how much more she could get away with. How much further could she push me, and still have me come back for more? Carrie eventually whispered, urging me to be reasonable. In that moment, I realized she had failed me once again, and it was the end for us. She continued, expressing how much she desired to see her old friends again and relive her old student days one last time. She asked me to hang on a little longer while she had her last gentle little fling, promising that everything would return to normal. She insisted that she genuinely loved me and assured me that she would make it up to me. She stared at me imploringly, her eyes begging me to agree, but I said nothing in reply. Carrie went to say something else to me, but Carl had had enough as well. He kissed her hard and threw out even harder, and her words were transformed into nothing. That was it. I had all the information I needed. My wife was coming back home after all, but I'd have to wait until tomorrow or maybe the day after, or the day after that. Fine. That was great, wasn't it? I noticed that the West Indian guy was edging over towards me, so I held up my hands and backed off. No point in getting involved in a one-sided fight with him again. The whole bar had fallen silent, waiting to see what was going to happen, but as far as I was concerned, nothing was going to happen, at least not straight away. "See you all later then," I said quietly. "I'm not still 14, Terry," Carrie burst out. "I can look after myself now." Even her face fell when she saw how that punched me, her one special thing over all those years, and she was throwing it back in my face. "I'm sorry, Terry," she started. "I really didn't mean that But I ignored her, taking no notice of her incoherent apology. As I backed out through the door, Carl laughed out loud again and slid her blouse right off her, reaching up under her skirt even as I watched to rub my face in my misery. It could have been that caused the tears to roll down her cheeks, but somehow I doubted it. I guess she still loved me in her way, and to see me humiliated like that again could have just been too much. That's what I like to think anyway. As I closed the door behind me, the silence in the pub crashed as everyone started to talk and laugh at the same time. I guess they thought they'd seen the last of me. Strolling slowly back to my car, I opened the boot and took out the stuff that I'd put there before I left the house. Anybody watching me would have thought I was cool and relaxed, whereas actually I was fuming inside, terrified of what I had decided to do, not knowing how it was going to turn out. I had a license for my over and under 12-bore Browning rifle. I'd been going to clay pigeon shooting for a couple of years by then, and though I wasn't very good at it, I figured I didn't have to be for what I had planned. I selected a handful of cartridges, making sure they were all small caliber, as I didn't want to end up in prison on a homicide charge. I broke the weapon and pushed 2 rounds in, putting the rest in my jacket pocket. A few moments later, and I was back outside the pub, staring at the 2 big engraved windows. This will wake them up, I thought, my heart thundering away inside my jacket. This wasn't me. It just wasn't me. But what else was I to do? There was no mileage in going back in and arguing with her, as she wouldn't agree, and I'd probably get another smacking. What would I do if I simply went home, wait for her to come back to me and discuss how we might get over what she had done, how she had humiliated me? No bloody way. It had gone beyond that by now, and I wasn't taking any more crap from any of them. Taking aim at the first window, I squeezed the trigger just like I'd been taught. My arm was trembling, shaking even, and the barrel of the rifle was swaying around uncertainly in a large circle as I fought to control my nerves. It didn't matter really, as I was no more than 12 or 15 from the window. I increased the pressure on the trigger and resisted the urge to close my eyes. There was a loud bang, and an instant later, the whole window disintegrated in a twirling mass of broken glass. I took aim at the second window with renewed confidence, fired off the second barrel, and the other window followed suit. The report from the weapon echoed round the surrounding buildings, far louder than it had ever before sounded when I had shot previously out in an open field and mingled with the tinkling of fallen glass. I calmly dug 2 more cartridges from my pocket and loaded them into the weapon. Then I waited to see what would happen. I really had no idea how they would respond, and almost hoped that they wouldn't. But I was ready and prepared to show them that they'd made a big mistake if they thought I was a wimp and would take what they had done to me lying down. The doors flew open, and several guys poured out. They stopped dead when they saw me, stood there with the weapon. Nobody moved. Then Carl came charging out, closely followed by his big henchman. "Stupid effing stinker!" he screamed at me and charged me, maybe thinking I'd not thought to reload, maybe not thinking at all. I took careful aim somewhere around his knees, as I didn't want to risk actually execute him and put pressure on the trigger. I was as cool as a cucumber, even having time to note that my arms no longer trembled and that the weapon was pointing exactly where I was aiming it. Time seemed to slow down. I had all the time in the world. I quite clearly saw the look on his face change from rage to terror as he realized that he had made a serious error of judgment. Maybe I had the same grin on my face that he'd had just a few moments before. You remember the one when you know you've really got the better of someone? Bang! He went down screaming, even surprising me with the mess it made of his legs. Fair play to the guy. He didn't even hesitate. Great courage or no brains, I'm not sure. But he didn't stop, not that is, till the second barrel load ripped into his legs and put him down as well. The two of them lay on the ground, Carl screaming and the guy, Ted, groaning aloud. I didn't even bother to reload that time. My emotions were too shot. But fortunately, the rest of the crowd suddenly melted away. Everything went calm. Relatively, that is, as two injured guys can make a lot of noise. It was a short walk back to the car, though my legs were so wobbly I thought I might fall over. The rifle went back in the boot, and I gingerly started the motor and made my way home. I drove slowly and very carefully indeed. I'd thought of going into the pub to frighten the crap out of Carrie, but I couldn't. I didn't trust myself. And to be honest, it had terrified me, doing what I'd just done. But I'd done it, though. I'd bloody well done it, just as I'd promised myself I would. But enough was enough. Strangely, I slept well that night and woke up quite fresh. Black eye and bruised face still, but otherwise quite fresh. I wondered who would turn up first, Carrie or the police, to arrest me. I hadn't even put the rifle away, and it was still in the boot of my car. As it turned out, Carrie couldn't turn up. About 10 o'clock, I got a phone call asking me if I was the husband of Carrie Bellings. "Yes, I am," I replied, wondering what it was about. It was the police. That morning, I had anticipated a visit from them, perhaps for my arrest. However, the call I received was about Carrie. They informed me that she was under arrest at the station and asked me to come and collect her. My genuine surprise prompted me to question the reason for her arrest. The reply was unsettling. She had been taken in for prostitution, along with a group of other working girls after a shooting on the edge of town. In response, I expressed a realization, understanding the reasons behind her recent behavior and late-night returns. The police officer acknowledged my understanding somberly, expressing regret for the way I had found out, noting that such situations were not uncommon. Unfortunately, my comments seemed to contribute to her unfortunate fate. It turned out they initially considered her to be more upper class than the other women involved, and my refusal to collect her likely exacerbated the situation. As a result, she was prosecuted, found guilty, lost her new job, and faced challenges in securing future employment, given the stigma associated with a prostitution conviction for a young female graduate. The police didn't even ask me whether I owned a rifle. Mine was registered to me quite openly back in Bedford, where we just moved from, but they never even checked. I wasn't a suspect in any way, so why would they? But why did nobody from the pub split on me? Well, I had no idea at all. Carrie tried to contact me time and time again. I never met up with her again, but I did eventually accept one of her calls after she got more and more desperate. She told me she still loved me and all the usual rubbish. I think she really did as well, and obviously was broken-hearted that I wouldn't entertain taking her back. I refused to even discuss it, and she acted a little frightened of me after I had dealt with our problem as firmly as I had. When I questioned Carrie about her past involvement with Carl and her job at the pub during her student days, she was straightforward with me. I demanded an explanation, asking how she transitioned from working behind the bar to the events that transpired the other night. Carrie clarified that she had never mentioned working behind the bar at the pub during her student days. The weight of those words punched me hard. It suddenly became clear. She had worked for Carl as one of his girls. The realization explained the hold he had over her. I had unknowingly married an ex-courtesan, and it took going back to that place to uncover the truth. Whether that revelation was a good or bad thing, it's hard to determine. That's a judgment others will have to make for themselves. It was her that warned me that Carl would come looking for me to sort me out himself once he was back on his feet. That is, maybe that's why nobody from the pub told the police about me, as people like that sort their own problems out. He'd never find me. Of course, I backed out of the job in Leeds, which they understood after the news of my wife got out, but I took the one in the Middle East, where they were happy to have me on a bachelor posting as they're cheaper than a married couple. That's about where we came in. I suppose I got away with it. To my surprise, I actually got away with it, and they put it all down to a gangland shooting. I suppose you might be wondering what then happened to me. Okay, well, that's natural. As you might imagine, I gave up clay pigeon shooting and sold my rifle, and then took up golf instead. Got quite good at it as well, and eventually got my handicap down to 6. I went out with quite a few different women, but only discovered just how good my wife Carrie had really been in bed. Well, she would have been, wouldn't she, as she had worked at it, as it were, in both senses of the word. Then I met up with Angie, a lovely American woman who I met in Dubai. Life was fine after that, really fine. I never inquired too deeply quite where she'd gained her experience, but I really think she was just a gifted amateur. I hoped so. Anyway, we have never married. She didn't want to. And strictly speaking, I was still married. And I still haven't bothered to get divorced. I came back to the UK occasionally, but always steered clear of Leeds till at last I couldn't resist it. One Thursday in June found me slowly driving past the Rose and Crown, hoping that nobody would recognize me after all that time. The fine decorated windows had been replaced by some modern double-glazed units. Pity, really. I'd rather like them. I sat there in my car for a while, and at last, to my surprise, a guy in a wheelchair turned up. He was a big chap and tough-looking, but fatter than I'd remembered. Carl. But of course, I'd only seen him a few short times, and that had been 4 or 5 years previously. What clinched it was the big man pushing him, the one with the really bad limp. That could only have been Ted. Then several women poured out of the pub to see Carl, report to him. Maybe that being easier, no doubt, than getting him up the 3 steep steps into the bar. They all looked rough, just like the last time I'd been there. Except one of them, that is. One of them looked that little bit different. Pretty, slender, beautiful, long legs. Well, yes, it could have been her, though she looked much, much older. She still kept her hair short, and was still quite smartly dressed. Her eyes had a worn-out look about them, though, and the smile that I had once loved was nowhere to be seen. She didn't look very happy at all, but I didn't hang around to make sure she was, as she'd said, not 14 anymore, and could look after herself. Strange how things turn out, isn't it? If only that bloody restaurant hadn't redecorated their dining room, then maybe she would be at home right now with our children, the ones we'd never now have. I wouldn't have been any the wiser, and maybe we would have lived happily ever after.
Story 4.
Thomas Reeves's journey into law enforcement wasn't born out of ambition, but from tragedy. As a young boy in rural Massachusetts, he witnessed a violent robbery that claimed the life of his father, a local shopkeeper. That moment seared an unshakable resolve into him, to ensure no family endured such loss without justice. During his college years, Thomas's knack for piecing together intricate puzzles led him to criminology. At the time, the notion of joining the police force seemed distant. He had initially planned a career in academia. However, an internship with the Boston Police Department exposed him to the grim realities of crime and the profound satisfaction of solving cases. In his rookie years, Thomas was quickly recognized for his ability to detect patterns others missed. An uncanny intuition paired with methodical investigation brought him his first major case, a serial burglar who had eluded capture for months. The success established his reputation, but it also painted a target on his back. Before marrying Victoria, Thomas had weathered the complexities of human nature, seeing both the worst and the best in people. Yet, he had never felt more vulnerable than when he first proposed to her. Victoria, then a rising star in Boston's cutthroat real estate market, represented the kind of success and determination Thomas admired. Their partnership seemed unshakable at the time. The couple's Beacon Hill home was a testament to their shared achievements. It was both a sanctuary and a symbol, reflecting Victoria's refined taste and Thomas's relentless dedication to creating a secure space for their future. Life seemed idyllic, though cracks began to form as their careers demanded more time and energy. As Victoria's real estate empire expanded, so too did the distance between them. What began as subtle changes, a new perfume, unexplained absences, grew into glaring signs of secrecy. For Thomas, whose instincts rarely betrayed him, it felt like the beginning of a case too close to home. The persistent drumming of autumn rain against the bedroom window mirrored the tension brewing inside Detective Thomas Reeves. Standing motionless near the entrance of their spacious closet, his hands buried deep in his pockets, he observed his wife preparing for yet another evening away. Victoria Tori Reeves, exuding her usual composed charm, applied a vivid layer of crimson lipstick with practiced precision. Her calm exterior did little to ease Thomas's concerns. Years of policing had honed his ability to read people, and something about Tori's recent behavior sent a chill down his spine. Subtle shifts in her demeanor hinted at secrets she wasn't sharing, and the mounting evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Ambition had always been one of Tori's defining traits, the very quality that had drawn Thomas to her in the first place. But now, it felt as though that drive had taken a darker turn, and Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that her priorities had shifted in ways she wasn't willing to share. "Another late-night meeting?" he asked, keeping his tone light, though his eyes stayed fixed on her. From the mirror, he saw the way she avoided his gaze, adjusting the pearl earrings he'd given her for their anniversary. "The Morrison deal won't wait," she replied with practiced nonchalance, reaching for her Chanel No. 5. "Don't wait up." Thomas watched as she smoothed the unfamiliar black Valentino dress over her hips. Her wardrobe had become noticeably more extravagant in recent months, her once elegant but understated style now replaced by high-end designer pieces. "Those meetings seemed to stretch later and later," he observed casually, leaning against the doorway as she gathered her things. "That's what happens when you're managing a $50 million project," Tori said, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor of their meticulously renovated Victorian home in Beacon Hill. The house, much like her, was a symbol of her skyrocketing success in Boston's competitive real estate world. Trailing her downstairs, Thomas couldn't help but notice how often she glanced at her phone, her fingers moving across the screen with what seemed like nervous urgency. Her makeup was heavier than usual, and the entire picture, her polished appearance, the vague explanations, the nervous energy, didn't add up. "Is Jack Morrison joining tonight?" he asked, referring to the lead investor in her project. She paused, but only for a fraction of a second. "No, he's overseas. Just some board members and the technical team." Sliding her phone into her Hermes Birkin bag, she avoided his eyes again. "Sounds like a packed agenda," Thomas remarked, opening the door for her. The rain outside had intensified, battering the cobblestone streets. "Drive carefully. It's nasty out there." Stay out. For a brief moment, something flickered in her expression, something like guilt. She stepped closer, straightening his tie in a gesture that felt almost nostalgic. "Don't stay up too late working on that cold case," she said softly, before walking out into the storm. From the doorway, Thomas watched as her Mercedes pulled away, disappearing into the rainy night. Her perfume lingered, but so did another scent, something woodsy and expensive, distinctly masculine. In his office, Thomas opened his laptop and activated the GPS tracker he'd placed on her car weeks earlier. The red dot moved across the map, heading not for the financial district but toward Back Bay. Picking up his phone, he dialed a familiar number. After a few rings, Detective Grace Rodriguez answered. "Grace, it's Tom. Can we meet tomorrow? Usual place?" She paused, but only briefly. "Everything okay?" "Just need a second opinion," Thomas said, his eyes glued to the screen. "Dorchester Diner, 7 sharp," Grace replied. "I'll grab our booth." "Appreciate it," he said. "I'll bring what I've got." After hanging up, Thomas leaned back in his chair, replaying the evening in his mind. He grabbed his notebook and began jotting down observations. The expensive wardrobe upgrades, the vague answers, the inconsistencies. Rain continued to pound against the window, and the clock in the hallway chimed 9, breaking the silence. Thomas closed the notebook and moved to the window, staring out at the rain-slick streets below. His gut told him that this wasn't just about an affair. It felt bigger, more calculated. He scrolled through his contacts, pausing at Grace's name. After years on the force, he knew the most dangerous cracks often formed closest to home. Tomorrow's coffee would be the start of something deeper. The Dorchester Diner hadn't changed in over a decade. Its cracked vinyl booths and faded menus had seen countless cops and detectives through tough mornings, and today was no different. Thomas slid into his usual seat across from Grace, the air thick with the comforting smell of coffee and bacon. Grace hadn't changed much either. Her sharp eyes scanned his face as she handed him a cup of black coffee. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, pushing a plate of hash browns toward him. "Nice to see you too," Thomas replied, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Thanks for meeting me. This isn't official." "I figured," Grace said, leaning back in the booth. "You've got that look, like there's something you're not ready to say out loud." Thomas pulled a manila folder from his bag, setting it between them on the table. "It's personal," he admitted. "But it feels bigger than that." Grace studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You sure you want to dig into this? Sometimes it's better not to know." Before he could answer, their waitress Betty arrived with their order. "Denver omelets, extra cheese and peppers," she said with a smile. "Coffee's on the way." Thomas nodded his thanks, but didn't touch the food. Instead, he opened the folder and pushed it toward Grace. "I need your perspective," he said quietly. "I think this is just the tip of something much larger." Grace scanned the contents, her expression hardening as she flipped through the pages. "You're right," she said finally. "This isn't just personal, it's a web, and I think it's time we start untangling it." Thomas nodded, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was something far more dangerous. And now it was time to uncover the truth. After Betty left, Thomas opened the folder, revealing bank statements, property records, and surveillance photos. Grace's eyebrows rose as she scanned the documents. "These transactions are deliberate," she said, pointing to a statement. "Just under reporting limits, spaced out to look random. That's textbook money laundering." Thomas pushed another paper forward. "Look who joined her charity board 3 months ago." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Alexander Wade? The hedge fund guy?" She quickly typed something into her phone. "We've heard whispers about him. Nothing solid, but enough to keep tabs." Thomas slid over a series of photos showing Tori and Wade meeting at upscale spots around the city. "It's not just money," he said. "Their body language looks staged, like they're performing." Grace nodded, her fork poised over her hash browns. "That's not an affair, it's tradecraft. If she's involved with Wade, this is serious." Thomas showed her video footage of Tori and Wade entering a hotel. "Watch how they scan their surroundings. It's deliberate." Grace exhaled sharply. "Tom, your wife might be in over her head. Coercion's a real possibility." "I've considered that," he said grimly, "but I need proof. That's why I called you." Grace tapped her notebook thoughtfully. "Wade's financials will be our starting point. My team's flagged suspicious real estate deals. We'll cross-reference with Tori's projects. But you have to keep this under the radar." "I know how to play it," Thomas said, his resolve hardening. "I just need the truth." Grace gave a small nod. "We'll get it. But be careful. This is professional-level danger. One misstep, and they'll know we're onto them." Thomas's expression was steely as he stared at the folder. "I've spent 2 decades keeping up appearances. I'll do whatever it takes." They spent an hour reviewing documents, Grace jotting notes and texting her team. As the diner emptied, their coffee cooled, and their unease grew. "Here's one more," Thomas said, sliding over a photograph. "Taken yesterday at the St. Regis. Recognize him?" Grace's face darkened as she studied the image. "I do. He's tied to major players in international finance. If these people are involved..." She didn't need to finish. They both knew the implications. "Keep digging," Thomas said, gathering the files. "But stay careful. Secure channels only, and watch your back." As they left, Grace caught his arm. "We'll figure this out, Tom. Just don't do anything reckless." Thomas managed a wry smile. "Slow and steady, Grace." "That's what worries me," she muttered, squeezing his arm before stepping into the rain. Thomas paid the bill, leaving a generous tip, and walked out into the dreary weather. His phone buzzed. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up." Tucking it away, his jaw tightened. The investigation was officially underway. Later that night, Thomas parked in the precinct garage. The rain had stopped, leaving the slick concrete reflecting harsh fluorescent light. Nearly midnight, the garage was almost deserted. His footsteps echoed as he approached his SUV, the weight of the day's findings heavy in his briefcase. Another set of footsteps made him pause, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "Detective Reeves?" A young woman stepped into the light. Mid-20s, professionally dressed, but disheveled, she looked terrified. "I'm Bethany Porter," she said, voice trembling. "Wade's assistant. I need to talk." Thomas studied her. "Late for a social call, Miss Porter." "This isn't social." She pulled a USB drive from her bag, causing him to tense. "Wade isn't who he claims to be. Neither is your wife. They're planning something terrible. I couldn't stay silent." Thomas didn't take the drive immediately. Why me? Why not the FBI? Her laugh was bitter. I tried. Wade has connections everywhere. Files vanish, complaints are buried, witnesses. She trailed off, glancing nervously around. Please, take it. Everything's on here. But be careful. They monitor everything. Thomas accepted the drive, watching her withdraw quickly. How did you get this? I'm his assistant. I handle his schedule, correspondence. He underestimates me, but I've been documenting everything. Her hands shook as she spoke. The charity board, the Morrison Project, it's not what you think. Offshore accounts, shell companies, people who vanish after one meeting. A car engine echoed, and Bethany flinched. No police reports, she whispered. No official channels. Just look at the drive, but not at home or the station. Thomas pocketed the drive. How can I reach you? You can't, she said, backing into the shadows. Be careful, detective, especially with those closest to you. Before he could respond, she vanished into the garage. The USB felt like a lead weight in his pocket as he scanned the now silent space. Reaching his car, Thomas texted Grace. Need secure location, off the books tech support. Her reply came swiftly. My place, 1 hour, bring coffee. Thomas took a long indirect route home, maintaining a facade of routine in case anyone was watching. The USB drive in his pocket felt heavy, its implications replaying in his mind alongside Bethany's warning about trust. At home, he found Tori's note on the counter. Gone to bed early. Big presentation tomorrow. The house was quiet as he moved through it, instincts from years of training keeping his steps silent. After changing and grabbing his laptop bag, he left a note about following up on a case lead. In their bedroom, Tori appeared to be asleep, though the faint trace of that unfamiliar cologne lingered. Pausing at the doorway, Thomas replayed Bethany's words about betrayal. Back in his car, he used an old burner phone from his undercover days and took a cautious hour-long drive to Grace's house, ensuring he wasn't followed. The USB in his pocket felt like a live grenade ready to detonate. Grace was waiting in her office, her encrypted laptop ready. She took the drive, her expression serious. Are you sure about this? Once we know, there's no turning back. Thomas thought of Tori, Bethany, and the growing suspicions. Do it, he said. Grace inserted the drive, and files began to decrypt. Thomas sat silently, bracing himself. When the first file opened, the plans laid out were worse than anything he'd imagined. The next morning, Thomas sat in his car across from McKenna Security Solutions, a sleek downtown office building. The USB's contents were still weighing on him. Colonel James Iron Jim McKenna, his former Special Forces commander, was his next stop. McKenna's office reflected his disciplined nature, meticulously arranged awards, strategic furniture placement, and nothing out of place. You look like hell, McKenna said as Thomas entered, shaking his hand and motioning him to sit. When's the last time you slept? Not important. Thomas placed the USB on McKenna's desk. I need your expertise and your discretion. McKenna plugged the drive into a secure laptop, his expression darkening as he scanned the files. Your wife's caught up with dangerous people, he said, turning the screen to show a dossier. Wade's real name is Anton Petrov, ex-FSB, running a massive money laundering operation. Thomas felt a chill. Russian intelligence? Former FSB, McKenna clarified. He built his empire after the Soviet collapse. He displayed a web of financial transactions. The Morrison development isn't real estate, it's a front for laundering money. Why involve me? Thomas asked, leaning forward. McKenna pointed to a timeline. You started digging into property transfers tied to the development. Petrov saw you as a threat and decided to eliminate you. Thomas's stomach twisted. And Tori? McKenna pulled up more files. Her real estate success is built on dirty money. Petrov started with legitimate-looking investments and slowly pulled her into his operation. Now he has enough to implicate her in felonies, ensuring her cooperation. Thomas's thoughts raced. The homicide plot ties up loose ends. Exactly. Classic FSB tactics. Control, compromise, eliminate. Thomas stood and looked out the window at Boston Harbor. I need to get Tori out. Whatever she's done, she's still my wife. McKenna joined him. It's not that simple. Petrov's operation is entrenched. Walking away won't stop them. Thomas turned. Then we bring them down. McKenna grinned, a glint of their shared combat days in his eyes. That's the Tom Reeves I know. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Cancel my meetings. I need everything we have on the Morrison Development's security protocols. For hours, Thomas and McKenna combed through blueprints, security schedules, and financial records. McKenna's resources were staggering. Satellite images, building schematics, and personnel files for everyone tied to Petrov's operation. He's paranoid, but arrogant, McKenna said, spreading a map of Boston's financial district. He hides behind his Wade persona, thinking his FSB training makes him untouchable. Thomas nodded. We let him think his plan is working, keep him comfortable while we build our case. Classic counterintelligence, McKenna agreed. I've got federal contacts who've been after Petrov for years but lacked the evidence, until now. Thomas glanced at his phone. Another text from Tori. Working late again. The pieces clicked. This wasn't an affair. She was being manipulated by an exploiter. What's our first move? Thomas asked. We make him think he's winning, McKenna said, showing an organizational chart of Petrov's network. Feed him what he expects, gather evidence, and prepare to bring it all down. As they planned, Thomas thought of Tori, likely in a luxury hotel, unaware she was being played. McKenna's voice broke his thoughts. From now on, trust no one. Petrov has people everywhere. Thomas remembered Bethany's warning. Understood. McKenna retrieved burner phones and encrypted drives from a safe. Welcome to the Shadow War. Let's hunt. The next 2 weeks were a carefully orchestrated operation. With McKenna and Grace, Thomas planted disinformation while collecting evidence. Using Bethany's access to Wade's office, they fed subtle hints that the homicide plot was on track. Grace set up a secure operations center in an abandoned warehouse, its monitors tracking Petrov's network. 5 million just moved through the Caymans, she reported. He's consolidating assets. Thomas studied the data. He's preparing to act. The door opened and Madeline Walsh entered. A seasoned CIA operative, she exuded authority. Dropping a thick file on the table, she said, You were right. Petrov's network spans 12 cities. Thomas scanned the file. How does he operate? Madeline brought up a map dotted with compromised developers. He targets ambitious people, manipulates them with blackmail, seduction, or financial schemes, and turns them into pawns. Thomas's chest tightened. Tori's just another sufferer? Madeline's tone softened. She's vulnerable, but not innocent. She made choices, some unethical. Before Thomas could respond, a tech analyst interrupted. Wade just called an emergency board meeting for the Morrison development. They watched surveillance footage as attendees arrived. Tori appeared in a Chanel suit, her Hermes bag in hand. She's nervous, Madeline observed. See how she keeps adjusting her collar? Classic stress sign. Thomas stared at the screen, remembering how Tori fidgeted with jewelry when anxious. We've got audio, Grace said, filling the room with the board meeting's feed. Wade's smooth voice came through. All obstacles have been addressed. The final phase begins. Thomas's skin crawled. They were treating his planned homicide like a business deal. Your wife's unusually quiet, Madeline noted. She knows what's coming, Thomas said, his voice heavy. She's already made her choice. The board meeting lasted another hour, full of coded conversations and hidden agendas. Afterward, Tori and Wade left together, heading to their usual hotel, but something was different this time. Look at Wade's new security detail, McKenna noted, pointing to the screen. Ex-Spetsnaz, he's bringing in heavy hitters. They're preparing for action, Madeline said. The question is, what's our move? Thomas didn't hesitate. We keep up the ruse, make them believe their plan is on track, and gather all the evidence we need. Grace pulled up financial records. I'm building a RICO case. If we prove the pattern across all 12 cities, we can dismantle the entire network. We need solid proof, Madeline added. Something that ties Wade to Petrov and exposes the operation's full scale. Thomas turned to McKenna. Can we leverage the new security guys? One of them has a gambling issue, the other has family debts, McKenna replied with a grin. We're on it. Careful, Madeline warned. Push too hard and Petrov will sense a trap. Thomas shook his head. We don't push. We let them come to us. Madeline's tone turned somber. There's something else. Tori's involvement goes deeper than we thought. She's been actively participating for years. Thomas took a deep breath. Show me. Madeline displayed the evidence, and the truth hit Thomas like a gut punch. Tori hadn't been just a pawn. She'd knowingly made decisions that placed her firmly in Petrov's web. The woman he'd loved for 15 years was not who he thought she was. Later, in a dimly lit parking garage, Thomas waited in the shadows. McKenna's intel was clear. This was where Petrov's men would strike. A black SUV arrived, and 3 men stepped out, their movements revealing military training. Thomas recognized them as ex-Spetsnaz operatives from the surveillance photos. They swept the area, moving with precision, But they underestimated their target. Thomas had prepared meticulously, knowing every blind spot and acoustic trick in the garage. When the lights flickered, the men tensed, splitting up to search. The first went down silently, subdued with a chokehold. The second was more cautious, but fell to Thomas's experience and strategy. The third was the toughest, weapon drawn and scanning the shadows. Their brief fight left Thomas with a bruised rib, but his counterattack was swift and decisive. Securing the unconscious men, Thomas searched their phones. The communications he found revealed the extent of Petrov's operation, and something far worse, Tori's active involvement. One chilling message stood out. Target's routine confirmed. Wife says pension and insurance updated. She's ready to play grieving widow. Thomas leaned against a pillar, staring at the screen in disbelief. The designer clothes, late nights, and distant behavior weren't just about money laundering. They were part of a plan to have him liquidated and collect his benefits. Sirens in the distance snapped him back. He photographed the evidence and anonymously reported the scene before disappearing. By the time police arrived, Petrov's men would be unable to explain their presence without exposing the operation. As Thomas drove toward the safe house, his thoughts raced. The confrontation in the garage had provided vital evidence linking Petrov's network to organized crime, but it also exposed a painful truth about his wife. His phone buzzed with a message from Grace. Evidence secured, meeting at safe house in 30. He turned his car, his resolve hardening. The clock was ticking. Petrov's network would soon realize something had gone wrong. The safe house, a nondescript walk-up in Somerville, was perfect for avoiding detection. Parking several blocks away, Thomas approached on foot, carefully checking for any signs of a tail. Inside, Grace, McKenna, and Madeline were already working, their faces lit by glowing monitors. "The phones?" Grace asked. Thomas handed them over along with his own phone, loaded with photos of key messages. "It's bad. Tori isn't just laundering money, she's been planning something far worse." Grace plugged in the phones, her face tightening as the messages appeared. "This is methodical," she said. "She's been setting this up for months, maybe years." "Classic sociopath," McKenna muttered, reading over her shoulder. "Playing a role to perfection." Madeline cross-referenced financial records. "These life insurance adjustments fit the timeline. She's been methodically paving the way for your homicide." Thomas paced the room, his ribs aching. "I thought she was a sufferer being manipulated, but she's been complicit all along." Madeline spoke softly. "Sometimes those closest to us are the hardest to truly know." The room was silent until Grace announced, "We've got everything to dismantle the operation. Financial records, contact lists, operational details. But if we act too soon, they'll scatter," McKenna warned. "We need them to think their plan is on track." Thomas stopped pacing. "They'll expect those men to check in soon. We've got 12 hours at most." A phone buzzed, freezing everyone. Grace read the message aloud. "Is it done? Need confirmation for next phase." It was from Tori. Thomas felt like he'd been punched. His wife's detached words, treating his homicide as a task, shattered any lingering hope. "We use this," Madeline said, her tone sharp. "Keep them thinking everything's on schedule." McKenna nodded. "We hit them fast while they still believe their plan is intact." Thomas stared at the message, memories of his marriage clashing with the cold reality. How long has she been planning this? How much of our life was real? Grace's voice was soft but steady. "What's our move, Tom?" Thomas straightened. "We turn their plan against them, keep control of the narrative, and make them believe they're still winning." McKenna pulled up schematics of Petrov's operation. "We know their personnel, protocols, and next moves. The advantage is ours." "And they still think they're dealing with a cop," Madeline added. "Not a special forces veteran with a team of intelligence operatives." Thomas looked at the message one last time. "Send the reply. Let's set the trap." Grace crafted the response, and as she hit send, Thomas moved to the window, staring at the city lights. Somewhere, his wife awaited news of his end of life. Soon, she'd learn just how wrong she'd been. The surveillance room was alive with activity, its monitors glowing faintly as Grace adjusted the audio feeds. McKenna's voice came through their earpieces. "Camera 3 is live." His team had worked all night planting surveillance equipment in Tori and Petrov's penthouse. Thomas watched the screens intently, every muscle tensed. The game had shifted. Now, it was their turn to strike. Thomas tensed as the elevator doors opened on the surveillance feed. Tori stepped out, followed by Petrov, now shedding his Wade persona. His transformation was striking. Gone was the polished hedge fund manager, replaced by the cold precision of a trained operative. Everything's proceeding as planned, Petrov said, his Russian accent now clear. Shrugging off his tailored jacket, he let it fall onto a leather chair. The police found exactly what we wanted them to. Grace's team had carefully staged the garage scene, planting selective evidence to support the narrative of Thomas's end of life, a cop caught in a botched robbery. Tori moved to the bar, pouring champagne with steady hands. The diamonds at her throat sparkled. Last year's anniversary gift. The detective on scene didn't question a thing, she said with satisfaction. Just another routine robbery gone wrong. Petrov raised his glass in mock celebration. The great Detective Reeves, brought down by common thugs. The irony is delicious. Thomas's eyes stayed on his wife, searching for any sign of regret. Instead, she smiled coldly. He never saw my potential. Treated me like a trophy wife. Now, everything he built is mine. She gazed out at the Boston skyline. The pension, the insurance, the house, it all transfers automatically. No divorce, no legal battles. Clean. Grace's hand squeezed Thomas's arm in silent support as McKenna's team moved into position around the building, waiting for the signal. "You've exceeded my expectations, Victoria," Petrov said, joining her at the window. "When I brought you into the Morrison deal, I wasn't sure you had the stomach for this, but you're a natural." Tori's brittle laugh filled the room. "Real estate is a shark tank, Anton. You swim with exploiters or you get eaten." She set down her glass. "Should we rehearse for tomorrow? The grieving widow must be flawless." Thomas's jaw clenched as he watched her rehearse her devastated spouse act under Petrov's coaching. Every detail was practiced. The trembling voice, the tearful gestures, the photo clutched at the funeral. "Remember," Petrov instructed, "this isn't just for the police. The whole city will be watching. The grieving widow of Boston's most decorated cop. Perfect for the headlines." "I've been playing this role for 15 years, Tori replied, dabbing dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Each word was a blow to Thomas. The life he'd shared with her was nothing but a carefully crafted lie. "Movement outside," Grace said, switching cameras. Petrov's security detail was arriving, SUVs pulling up to the building. "They're rotating shifts." Thomas glanced at his watch. In 6 hours, news of his end of life would break. Petrov and Tori still believed their plan was flawless. "Send the confirmation," he said. Grace sent the staged message from Petrov's men, reporting Thomas's elimination. Minutes later, they saw Petrov check his phone and smile. "It's done," Petrov announced. "By tomorrow, your story will dominate the news." Tori raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said with a smirk, "and to my dear husband. He should have kept his nose out of the Morrison deal." Petrov nodded approvingly. "Your delivery is better, but add a touch of grief when mentioning him. It will sell the story." For hours, they watched as Petrov and Tori discussed their plans, from press statements to financial moves. Each casual mention of Thomas's homicide revealed their ruthless intentions. Around midnight, Petrov left for his penthouse, leaving Tori alone. Thomas watched her reflection in the window as she practiced her widow's smile. The ambition on her face was chilling, no remorse, only satisfaction. "All units ready," McKenna's voice came through. "Waiting for the command." Thomas's gaze stayed on Tori. "Let them enjoy their celebration," he said. "Tomorrow we show them a performance they'll never forget." Grace gave a curt nod, already in sync with federal agencies preparing for the morning's critical operation. On a nearby monitor, Tori lifted her glass in a self-congratulatory toast to her reflection, unaware that surveillance cameras captured her every move. The scene was set for the grand finale, though only Thomas and his team knew how this story would truly end. The first rays of dawn bathed Boston's skyline in golden hues as Grace orchestrated tactical teams stationed across the city. Months of painstaking preparation had culminated in this moment, with simultaneous raids planned in a dozen cities to dismantle Petrov's entire operation. "Status update," Grace commanded, her voice steady over the comms as she tracked multiple feeds. Reports poured in with precision. "Team Alpha in position at the penthouse. Team Bravo covering the skybridge. Team Charlie securing the garage exits. Financial units ready to freeze accounts." McKenna's voice broke through the controlled chatter. "Primary target on the move. Petrov just left his suite, heading toward the skybridge." Through surveillance feeds, Thomas tracked Petrov's movements. The man's security details scanned for threats, unaware they were already surrounded. Evidence from the confiscated hitmen's phones had given Thomas's team everything they needed. Security plans, guard schedules, even the codes to Petrov's private elevator. "Target has entered the primary location," McKenna reported, proceeding to Phase 2. On the screens, Petrov strode into Tori's penthouse. She was dressed impeccably for her role. A sleek black designer suit, makeup flawless and red-rimmed eyes, painstakingly created with irritants rather than genuine tears. Standing before a mirror, she rehearsed her eulogy, her voice cracking at carefully calculated moments. "He was my everything," she recited, her hand over her heart. "A brave officer, a devoted husband. I still can't believe he's gone." "Impressive delivery," Petrov remarked, pouring himself coffee. "The press will eat it up. Do you have the charity statement ready? His memory deserves it, of course." Tori's smile was cold and exploitory. Nothing opens wallets faster than a grieving widow starting a foundation for her late husband. "We'll have millions moving through it in no time." Their casual plotting to profit from Thomas's supposed end of life sealed his resolve. He keyed his radio. "All teams, execute." The operation unfolded with clockwork precision. Across the country, federal agents swarmed offices, seized assets, and arrested key figures in Petrov's empire. Bank accounts were frozen, shell companies dismantled, and safe houses raided. Back in the penthouse, Tori adjusted her costume jewelry, chosen to project the perfect image of mourning, when the sharp crack of breaching charges shattered the quiet. McKenna's team surged through multiple entry points with flawless coordination. "Federal agents, down on the ground!" Petrov moved instinctively, his FSB training kicking in as he reached for a concealed weapon. But McKenna's operatives, former special forces, were ready. "I wouldn't," McKenna said coolly. "Your entire operation is collapsing as we speak. It's over." Tori's mask slipped, her meticulously composed facade giving way to raw fury as she recognized McKenna. "This means—" "Yes, Mrs. Reeves," Grace said, stepping in with her federal badge displayed. "Your husband sends his regards." Tori's stunned expression mirrored Petrov's as realization dawned. Her intricate web of deceit had been part of Thomas's larger plan all along. "Practicing your lines," Thomas' voice crackled through the team's comms. "Save them for your prison audience." Desperation seized Petrov. He hurled his coffee mug at an agent and lunged toward what he thought was a panic room. But McKenna's team had already neutralized its security features. "Clear. Target secured," came the final report. As Petrov and Tori were restrained, Grace recited their rights. Agents documented every piece of evidence meticulously. The phones from Petrov's hitmen had given them the leverage for RICO charges, ensuring no loose ends. "The Morrison Project?" Tori muttered bitterly as she passed Grace in handcuffs. "Seized like everything else," Grace replied. "Your elaborate scheme to stage a homicide gave us the predicate crimes we needed. Turns out plotting to eliminate a cop isn't the best cover." Similar scenes played out nationwide. Grace's phone buzzed with confirmations. "Chicago, secured. Miami, documents in custody. Seattle, operation complete. Dallas, no casualties." McKenna joined Thomas in the surveillance center. "Ready to face her?" Thomas straightened his tie, preparing to confront the woman who had orchestrated his end of life. "Everything's recorded," McKenna said. "The jury's going to love this." As Thomas ascended in the elevator to the penthouse, his thoughts churned over the long road leading here. Every step, every deception had been calculated to bring them to this moment. When the doors opened, Thomas stepped into a room of broken illusions. His marriage had ended, but justice had just begun. Months later, the federal courthouse buzzed with activity. The operation had made national headlines, and today marked the culmination of the trial. International crime ring, toppled corrupt real estate empire, exposed detective uncovers, wife's homicide plot. Justice at last was served. In the courtroom, Thomas stepped into the witness stand, ready to give his final testimony. The evidence presented throughout the trial had been indisputable. Surveillance videos, financial ledgers, intercepted messages, and the meticulously documented homicide plot. But the prosecution wanted to close with an emotional punch, allowing Thomas to share, in his own words, the depth of the betrayal. "Detective Reeves," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the moment you first realized your wife's involvement in this conspiracy?" Thomas let his gaze sweep across the courtroom, pausing briefly on Tori. She sat at the defense table, her polished image replaced by the stark reality of prison attire, her face bare and worn from months in custody. "It wasn't the homicide plot that broke me," Thomas said, his voice firm but reflective. "It was realizing that every moment of our 15 years together was a lie. Every anniversary, every holiday, every quiet evening at home, each one was just part of her act. a long rehearsal leading to my eventual removal. As he spoke, the courtroom screens displayed evidence, images of Tori and Petrov celebrating the supposed success of the homicide, videos of her practicing a grieving widow's speech, and documents revealing plans to use his end of life to funnel millions through fraudulent charities. The most egregious crime here isn't just the money laundering or the conspiracy to homicide, Thomas continued, his tone sharpening. It's the betrayal of trust, not just mine, but the trust of every honest citizen who relies on the integrity of our institutions. When criminals like Alexander Wade, better known as Anton Petrov, turn legitimate businesses into criminal fronts, they don't just steal money, they steal our faith in the system, in each other, and in the foundations of our society. The jury appeared riveted as Thomas explained how the investigation revealed Petrov's long-standing tactics. He would recruit morally ambiguous yet ambitious individuals, entangle them in increasingly illegal activities, and then let them take the fall once their usefulness ended. It was a pattern designed to protect him while expanding his empire. Later, Thomas sat with Grace in the courthouse cafeteria, both quietly watching news reports about the trial on a mounted television. The statistics were staggering. 13 fraudulent real estate schemes exposed, over $3 billion in assets recovered, dozens of conspirators facing prosecution. Grace slid a cup of coffee toward him, a small gesture that had become their unspoken tradition over the years. "Quite a way to wrap up a marriage," she said, her tone light but understanding. "Any second thoughts?" Thomas considered the question as he watched a segment about Bethany Porter, one of the whistleblowers who had been instrumental in cracking the case. Now under witness protection, she was rebuilding her life, her bravery earning her a new chance at a future free of Petrov's influence. "Just that I didn't figure it out sooner," Thomas replied after a pause. "But sometimes you have to walk through the dark to really see the light." The broadcast shifted to McKenna, whose security firm had gained significant recognition and federal contracts following its involvement in the operation. He was giving an interview about strategies to prevent similar schemes. Meanwhile, Grace, newly promoted to lead the organized crime division, had already begun implementing innovative methods to detect and dismantle financial crimes on a national scale. Outside the courthouse, Boston's spring sunshine cast a golden glow on the streets below, promising renewal. Thomas watched pedestrians pass by, unaware of how close their communities had come to being overtaken by Petrov's sprawling corruption. When the verdicts were announced, they were unambiguous. Tori and Petrov were sentenced to multiple life terms. The precision and detail that had fueled their criminal enterprise ultimately became their downfall. Every staged moment, every premeditated step had been meticulously documented and turned against them in court. As Thomas exited the courthouse, he felt an unfamiliar lightness. The case had been transformative, painful but enlightening. He had learned hard lessons about trust, deception, and the masks people wear, but also about the enduring strength of loyalty, integrity, and the justice system's capacity for good. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, he paused to look back. What had ended here wasn't just his marriage, but an era of his life defined by betrayal. Endings, though, often mark the start of something new, and perhaps something better. At the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, the sterile visitation room was a far cry from the luxurious penthouses Tori Reeves once called home. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on her face, highlighting the toll of incarceration. The sleek designer wardrobe and manicured image were long gone, replaced by the plain orange uniform of a federal inmate. 5 years in prison had stripped away her former glamour. Her hands, once adorned with sparkling rings, now rested bare on the scratched surface of the visitation table. Across from her sat Dr. Sarachun, a prison psychiatrist conducting research on psychological manipulation in white-collar crime. Tori's story had made her a prime subject. "Let's talk about where you are now," Dr. Sarachun began, pen hovering over her notepad. "Your appeal was denied last month. How are you coping with that?" Tori let out a bitter laugh, her voice echoing off the room's concrete walls. 25 to life, no parole, same as Petrov." She traced invisible patterns on the table. "He's in Florence, Supermax. Turns out the money laundering was just the tip of the iceberg. They tied him to arms dealing, human trafficking, the works. And how do you view your role in his empire now?" "I was a fool," Tori admitted, her voice quieter than it once would have been. "I thought I was using him, leveraging his resources for my own gain. But the truth is, he was grooming me from the start. Every so-called investment in my business, every piece of advice, he knew exactly what he was doing. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of her mistakes evident. The ambition that once fueled her rise had become the very thing that dragged her down. In a high-security prison halfway across the country, Anton Petrov faced the bleak reality of his downfall. The empire he had meticulously built over decades had collapsed in a way he could never have imagined. What began as a federal investigation targeting 12 cities had unraveled operations spanning 27 cities and 3 continents. Authorities recovered not just $3 billion, but nearly $12 billion in illicit assets, exposing the vast scope of his criminal network. Meanwhile, in Boston's financial district, Grace Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, gazing out at the harbor that had been a silent witness to so many moments during the Petrov investigation. Her office, now part of the FBI's Real Estate and Financial Crimes Task Force, symbolized the progress made since those dark days. As the head of the newly formed unit, Grace had spearheaded a transformation in how financial crime was detected and dismantled. Lessons from the Petrov case became the foundation of a groundbreaking strategy, one that emphasized collaboration, technology, and foresight. "Director Rodriguez," her assistant's voice chimed over the intercom, "Colonel McKenna is here for your meeting." Grace stood as James "Iron Jim" McKenna walked in. His role in the Petrov case had catapulted his private security firm into the national spotlight, and now his expertise was indispensable to federal investigations. "Just back from Quantico," McKenna said, settling into a chair. "We're using the Petrov case as part of the curriculum. When I show the recruits how Thomas orchestrated the counter-operation, you can see the gears turning in their heads." Grace smiled, recalling the intensity of those days. "How's Thomas doing these days?" "He's thriving," McKenna replied, "running his own investigation firm in Colorado. He's got a knack for spotting financial fraud that most people can't even comprehend. His clients love him." After leaving the force, Thomas Reeves had established a private firm in Denver, specializing in uncovering corporate fraud and preventing insider threats. His book, Behind the Facade, Unmasking Corporate Fraud, had become a bestseller and a training staple for federal agents and private investigators alike. "And Bethany?" Grace asked, scrolling through her emails. "She just wrapped up her MBA at Stanford. Witness protection helped her rebuild her life, and now she's using her platform to advocate for whistleblowers. She's testifying before Congress next month." Bethany Porter's bravery had sparked a wave of change. Her testimony against Petrov's network had not only cracked the case, but also inspired others to come forward. Federal agencies had since implemented what they called the Porter Protocol, a set of best practices for protecting whistleblowers and leveraging their insights in high-stakes investigations. "What about the Morrison complex?" McKenna asked, accepting a coffee from Grace's assistant. "Completely repurposed," Grace said. "It's now a regional training center for law enforcement. They're using it to teach financial crime investigation techniques. Sometimes the best way to deal with darkness is to shine a spotlight right on it." Their conversation shifted to current cases, but Grace's mind lingered on the lasting impact of the Petrov case. Its revelations had forced a complete overhaul of Boston's real estate practices. New regulations, jokingly nicknamed the Reeves Reforms, required developers to disclose unprecedented levels of financial detail, ensuring no hidden players could operate in the shadows. In a modest diner in Dorchester, where Grace and Thomas had once shared countless early morning strategy sessions, a framed newspaper headline still hung prominently on the wall. "Boston Detective Cracks International Crime Syndicate," it declared in bold print. Betty, the ever-enthusiastic waitress, loved pointing it out to diners, proudly recounting how the two detectives used to brainstorm over coffee and omelets. The federal courthouse, now a frequent stop for law students, had become a case study in itself. The Petrov investigation was a cornerstone of criminal law classes, demonstrating the intersection of technology, law, and human psychology in modern prosecutions. Thomas rarely returned to Boston. Too many ghosts lingered in the city where his life had unraveled. Instead, he found peace in the Rockies, where his days were filled with meaningful work and the healing clarity of nature. Slowly, he had begun dating again, carefully rebuilding his personal life with the wisdom hard-won from his past mistakes. His last communication with Tori had come during her appeals process. She had written a letter, filled with apologies and pleas for understanding, but the words felt as hollow as their marriage had become. Thomas had chosen not to reply, letting silence convey the message better than words ever could. The funds recovered from Petrov's operation had been put to powerful use. A sufferer compensation program helped small businesses and families recover from financial devastation, while Thomas had dedicated his share of the forfeited assets to scholarships for children of fallen officers. It was his way of turning personal loss into something meaningful for others. Grace's phone buzzed, drawing her attention back to the present. Another case file awaited review. As she and McKenna pored over the details, she reflected on how the Petrov case had reshaped their lives and their field. "You know what Thomas always says," McKenna said, scanning the file. "The biggest scams don't hide in the shadows. They thrive in plain sight, cloaked in respectability." Grace smirked. "Speaking of scams, did you hear about the support group?" She was referring to a network formed by spouses and partners who had been blindsided by betrayal, much like Thomas had been. The group offered solace and strength, helping members heal while raising awareness about financial misuse and manipulation. Occasionally, Thomas would speak at their meetings, sharing his story to give others hope and a path forward. What began as a tangled web of lies and deception had left behind a legacy of truth and resilience. Though the shadows of Petrov's crimes still loomed, the light that followed was undeniable and lasting. From her office overlooking Boston Harbor, Grace pondered the far-reaching impact of the Petrov investigation. The criminal empire had been dismantled. Tori was paying the price for her choices, and countless lives had been irrevocably altered, some broken beyond repair, others rebuilt stronger than before. In her cell at the high-security Danbury prison, Tori clung to a single relic from her past, an old photograph tucked away in her belongings. It showed her and Thomas standing side by side at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for her first real estate project. They were smiling, full of hope for the future. On sleepless nights, she would stare at the picture, trying to pinpoint the moment her ambition became a poison, warping her values until success mattered more than people. Meanwhile, in a stark supermax cell in Florence, Anton Petrov's thoughts ran a different course. Reflection wasn't in his nature. Even stripped of his empire and freedom, he remained calculating, planning how to exploit any crack in the system. Though his reach had been severely curtailed, his scheming mind refused to rest. In Colorado, Thomas stood on the deck of his mountain home, watching the sunset cast hues of gold and violet across the peaks. His phone buzzed, a text from Grace alerting him to another case, another opportunity to stop someone else from suffering the betrayal he had endured. He smiled faintly, realizing how far he'd come. Endings, he had learned, were often beginnings in disguise, a chance to build something better, grounded in truth and resilience. The betrayal that once shattered his life had become the catalyst for a new mission, protecting others from falling prey to the same kind of deceit. Exposing the truth had been his first step toward rebuilding his life, and now it fueled his work every day. As night settled over the country, from Boston to Colorado, Connecticut to Florence, the central figures in this saga lived out the consequences of their choices. Some were confined by steel bars, others by the lingering echoes of their own guilt or resolve. All bore the weight of the truths the case had unearthed and the lessons it had taught. The story of Thomas and Tori Reeves, of Anton Petrov's empire and its collapse, became more than a criminal investigation. It stood as a testament to the power of truth over deception, of justice over greed, and the remarkable ability of people to rebuild after betrayal. In his Denver office, Thomas kept a small plaque on his desk, a gift from Grace. Its simple inscription read, "From darkness, light." Every morning, as he sifted through new cases of corporate fraud and financial manipulation, the words reminded him of what mattered most, that even the deepest wounds could lead to transformation. The plaque was both a symbol of his past and a beacon for his future, a reminder that the fight for integrity was worth it. And so, the story reached its quiet conclusion. The conspirators remained locked away, their schemes dismantled. The investigators continued their work, inspired by what they had achieved. And Thomas, no longer just a detective but a guardian of truth, found purpose in his mountain sanctuary. His work now was to help others navigate the same dark paths he once traveled, ensuring they, too, could find their way back to the light. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected, but it was perhaps the one they had earned. Choices had been made and consequences faced. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for. The chance to grow from their mistakes, to rise above their circumstances, and to move forward with the hard-won clarity that comes from confronting the shadows. No matter how dark the journey, the path to the light was always there for those willing to walk it.